Thanks. Every 4 years, the Justice Court is required to be certified, which is the process by which the administrative office of the court determines that the city is continuing to meet its statutory and administrative performance standards for the Justice Court. So this is the process, and the 4 years has passed, and so now it's time to recertify the Justice Court.
Okay. All right. Curtis, do you want to?
This is just a standard procedure with the court. Last year, we did it, last time we did it was 2015. We didn't have the opportunity to come and see the council, so we're glad to be here this time. Just a standard procedure that we've gone through with flying colors. We were able to answer the couple pages of questions with no hesitation at all. Everything's in order and intact. We did submit our security plan. As you know, this year there were a few minor changes with that. If there's any questions about that, or
Any questions about the resolution or security or anything else for Curtis? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Is there anything you'd like to share with us about the changes to your security plan that we should know?
not really, Councilwoman Mendenhall. There were just some updates. That security plan has been in place since the opening of the court a few years after, I believe. And over the years, we just tweak it a little bit. There are some minor changes with weapons policy and some of the jury movement and stuff like that.
Just keeping with best practices and
Correct.
regulations.
And with state statute.
Okay.
Great.
you.
Other questions or comments? All right. Well, it's good to see you. We'll see you in another 4 years.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Curtis. Okay, the next item on our agenda is an ordinance regarding the creation of a Fire Code Board of Appeals. Russell Weeks will join us at the table for this one. Paul Paulson, the fire marshal, will be here. Is he going to be here?
Yep, right behind me.
All right. And Jason Oldroyd's going to stay, and Chief McMicken. Okay, Russell.
This is a proposed ordinance that would bring Salt Lake City's code into alignment with state law and the International Fire Code. If the council decides to move forward on this item, it could consider it formally at its November 12th meeting. And I'll let Jason go ahead with the proposed amendments if he...
Sure. So essentially what we have with this requirement, the 2018 International Fire Code that recently has been adopted has some sections in Section 109 that mandate the establishment of a Fire Code Appeals Board. And it's a board where if someone has a concern with a decision that comes out of the Fire Marshal's office or the Fire Protection Bureau, then they can appeal that decision to this Fire Protection Board for a separate ruling or decision. After that, it could eventually, there's an appeal from that to the 3rd District Court if someone were to so require. It's essentially just something that the International Fire Code requires that we put into place, so we're in the process of doing that. Most of the requirements that are set forth in the ordinance are taken directly out of the International Fire Code language, as far as having the fire marshal be an ex officio member and the number of individuals and qualifications of those individuals.
Great. Councilmember Mendenhall.
So, thanks for being with us, guys. Give us an example, if you can, of how, whether it's, I was thinking, Anna and I were talking earlier about Square Kitchen opening and the process that it took to get Square Kitchen open over 2 years, and other businesses who we talked to who have, a lot to say about a lot of the permitting and process and inspections. But how would this change impact potentially, you could give us a hypothetical, the process of getting a business or a building opened?
I'm going to defer this to Chief Paulson, council member, because he sees these permits come across his
Okay.
desk every day, so he could probably give you a few specific examples.
Okay.
We don't have these very often, but sometimes someone will believe that our interpretation of the code may be different than their interpretation. And this is a way for them to get a ruling on, to make it fair for the business owner, whether the interpretation of the code, our interpretation was correct or theirs was, so.
And again, today, how would that be without this appeal authority?
Well, as always, we try to work with them and work through the process. It would just be a cleaner system. Right now, without the appeals process, if they take it all the way, we only have so many days that we can, to give them an appeal, and if we can't give an appeal, then they'll win their ruling the way they want it to go. I mean, we have to kind of, without the appeals process in place, we have to be able to kind of bow to their interpretation. I mean,
Could that be interpreted to mean it makes it harder for a petitioner?
No, Councilmember, I believe it would just, this is a more transparent way of interpreting the code. As human beings, we can read a paragraph, we can interpret it, and the code book will send you to various sections of the book for various interpretations, which our staff does very well. But once that happens, if there was a disagreement with a business owner or a contractor on how we interpreted the code, this would be 3 individuals that have a background in the fire prevention IFC code book, and they would be able to then review at a secondhand portion what the interpretation was. And if they ruled that our interpretation was incorrect, then, obviously, then we would have to change our interpretation. But I think this makes it more transparent for the public, and it's a much smoother process.
And just to make a point, Mr. Chair, the board would be made up of people who not only are familiar with the code, but they're considered, relatively expertise in it. It's not based on where they live, it's based on what they know.
Matt, can I?
Yep, go ahead
I
and
got 2 more
finish.
questions on that. Who chooses the board, the appeals board? And do the positions have specific qualifications beyond familiarity with the code?
The board will be chosen by the mayor's office and then come in front of council for consent and approval. The members would be considered experts in the area of the International Fire Code. They will not be members of the Salt Lake City government, so they'll be outside entities, so a more independent review board.
And my last question is about the timeline stipulated. Comparisons of if someone had wanted to make an appeal today without an appeals board, how long does that take, and what kind of guarantees would this process assure?
I believe that this process provides essentially an ultimate appeal authority. In the time I've worked with the Fire Protection Bureau, they've been exceptionally good at working with individuals to come up with solutions, but there has not been in place a separate appeal process or something if at the end of the day they weren't able to resolve those issues. So this ordinance would provide that path for an appeal that currently doesn't exist.
I'm asking about specific timelines of assurance. So if someone submits an appeal to the appeal authority that's being proposed, how long will it take, or what's the maximum amount of time that it sits with the appeal authority before they make a decision?
I would have to look that up. Do you happen to have, is there a timeline included?
in some of the
The
research
ordinance?
we found, it was something under a month, but there's not an exact timeline. That would be something we would set up in the appeals process. But it would have to be a definite time period.
I'm
So-
interested in that being included in the ordinance itself, and I'm interested in it lining up with other appeals processes like our, as happened with Planning Commission decisions. I think that we should have continuity through our appeals processes, and it should be written into the ordinance. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing that. I think it's pretty timely that we have this appeals board as we're trying to think how we encourage development in Salt Lake City, that it's more streamlined because of the numerous recurring complaints that we have from the development world and the business world. And as you know. And so, is there room for your board to have somebody, one of those members, to be a business owner or a developer that can give you that extra input on how certain decisions affect development and the timeliness of it? Is that allowed? Is it something that we can do, or you can do?
I know the requirements for the board members are that they be familiar with and have familiarity with the International Fire Code. If there were a business owner who had the requisite level of expertise, they would potentially be eligible to be a member of the board. But I think they would need to have the requisite expertise before they could be eligible to be a board member.
Right, so I guess this is a question for the council in general, like for discussion, like, so how do we marry these two components that are very important? Because the overarching goal for this is to have an appeals board, great, so we can, a business owner has a chance to come and appeal it, but without having somebody that has that experience in the business at the board, it's hard to convey or to come up with a solution that is reasonable, that will, that's reasonable for development, but also for the safety, right, for the fire requirements.
One clarification, the appeals board is not able to change the fire code.
Right.
So they still have to meet everything in the fire code. They only would rule on if we are interpreting the code correctly. So it's not something where someone else could come in and go, no, we need to be fair, we need to do this and this and this. It's spelled out specifically that it can, that it has to still meet the fire code.
Right, the basic requirements of the fire code. That's agreed. So where do we insert that portion of this equation, either before the appeals, or maybe it's not on the appeals board, but I think it's important to think that, to add somebody that it's on the other side of the table and says, this is why this code is affecting me if you follow it to the T. But if we follow the spirit of this law for safety, then this will be feasible for my business to move forward. Otherwise, you are killing my business essentially because of the expenses associated with that. Is that a conversation that we could have at a later time? Is there a conversation we need to have now? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Okay.
But it looks like there might be an answer.
Just one more thing to mention, and thanks to Assistant Chief Milne for bringing this to my attention again. The appeals board, the intent isn't for everything to go to the appeals board. Chief Paulson's staff works very hard and diligently on meeting with all the customers and trying to have a solution come at the lowest level. The appeals board would most likely only come into play up to maybe 3 times per year after a lengthy process of meeting and trying to come to a solution, whether that's the alternate means and methods to provide a solution to the question, or then to get an interpretation of the fire code. In the past history of the Fire Prevention Bureau, that has worked very well, and that's why we haven't had, I think we've only had maybe 1 request that would get near to an appeals board, maybe last year in 2018. But up to that point, we've been very successful in meeting with the individuals and coming up with common solutions for the betterment of the safety and moving the project along. So we feel like the appeals board would be a little bit further down the road after those actions took place.
So Councilmember Valdez-Morelos, does that address your?
Not necessarily, because I
Okay.
think the conversation is, as we move the city forward and we look at the issues that our constituents have with development and the fire code and the building permit process, and how it takes longer, or it sometimes is not reasonable, and therefore it's costing a lot of money then to those businesses, and preventing businesses from opening in Salt Lake and moving on to different cities or different counties. This is something that we need to start tackling sooner
so
than later.
tackling it in terms of the requirements in the International Fire Code?
No,
Okay.
that's something that we cannot touch.
Correct,
We have no
okay.
jurisdiction in that. But yes, on the process, where there's a different voice at the table when there are, roadblocks, that maybe there's a voice missing that, that maybe the city don't have expertise as a business owner, in a way. So I feel like a developer, a business owner brings this other perspective on how to, to move forward with complying with the International Fire Code, but it might not be to the T, like exactly how it says that it would be. So that's where I'm coming from, but we can
Okay,
move on.
so Councilmember, what if we did this? So tonight, we are scheduled to accept public comment, but we're not scheduled to, we're scheduled to take tentative action on the 12th of November. So we have a couple of weeks. Would you be willing to work with Russell and these folks and see, and kind of walk through, some different ideas? And then if you still have concerns that need to be addressed, we can schedule this for another work session.
Right.
And if not, hopefully, we can work through something in your meeting.
Thank you.
Would that be sufficient?
That would be sufficient.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. The first one is, from a city perspective, does this board, the way it's defined now, we're looking at it's 3 members, 5-year terms, et cetera, does it differ substantially from other boards in the city, the way we're running those?
I don't believe it differs substantially from most of the other boards in the city. Because of the specific expertise that's required, some of the requirements that would typically relate to the selection process have been changed so we can acquire that expertise. Other than that, most of the processes that this board would use would be the same that are already included as the more general catch-all provisions for operation of a board.
Based on the expertise needed, do we need to have compensation offered this board, or are we okay going without that at this point in
I
time?
don't believe we need compensation. My discussion with the various fire marshal administration has indicated that they believe that individuals would be willing to serve without compensation.
Okay. The second question is related to the interplay between the fire code and, say, the building code for the city. They inform each other, or maybe the fire code informs the building code mostly, put it that way. Talk to me how this interplay would work. So I'm thinking, say, a basement egress window, right? There's a fire issue there. It's built in the building permitting process, and there's some rules there that they have their own appeals board for. How would this work in those kind of situations where there's overlap?
Good question.
I'm just not quite sure. Say in a building permitting process, they say, well, you need a window this size in your basement and this kind of egress. It's a fire issue, I believe. But they have some ability to interpret that a little bit, the size-wise, but that comes from the fire code. And how would the fire sort of appeals board or the fire marshal's decision? I'm a little confused in this piece, I guess. I'm not sure.
I think they would overlap. I think that would be part of the reason that the board would be able to kind of weigh in there and say which way. We have very little conflict that way, though. Matter of fact, I can't think of a time when we've had conflicts between the building code and the fire code.
Okay. I'm just, my scenario in my head is somebody comes in with a window that's an odd shaped in a basement.
Right.
It doesn't fit the traditional thing in the permitting process. They say no, and it goes through that process. And if somebody doesn't like the outcome of that, even the appeals for there, could they take that particular situation and come back to the fire marshal? 'Cause you can't
Councilmember-
change the underlying code, I guess, but
Yeah, I think in many regards, the International Building Code and International Fire Code overlap one another. So in that specific example with the egress window, that's a life safety issue, especially in a basement. We must ensure that individuals have free access to evacuate a building.
Yeah.
So I think that your example would fall under this, because I think that was where the overlap is between the building code and the fire code. And the fire marshal and appeals board would act on that type of an issue because it is considered a life safety issue.
So I think we may need to, this is maybe one less likely scenario, perhaps, I'm just not sure. But I may want to talk a little bit at some point about if there's a discrepancy between the, say the building permit board and the fire board, how does that get resolved? It's a question for me. If it ever came up that way, if they said no, you said yes, would that override and they'd have to change the city sort of interpretation on that board or those kind of things?
As this particular provision allows the Fire Appeals Board to address issues in the International Fire Code or specific city fire code provisions. Anything that fell outside of that wouldn't be something this board would address. So I would envision a scenario where if the provision that was violated that created the problem fell under a fire code provision, it would come before this board if they couldn't find a separate resolution that addressed the issue. I believe that the board will rarely be used. Past experience has shown that they've been able to resolve it short of the board.
Okay.
And there has been good cooperation between the building officials and the fire code and the Fire Prevention Bureau.
Okay.
But I agree, it's something that we'd want to at least make sure that we had straight and clear.
I just didn't know if I was ever to serve on, say, the permitting board, the building board, and we didn't know what to do with the situation and said, well, it seems like a fire issue. Let's just kick it back to the fire marshal and board and see what they say, and then we'll act on that way. I didn't know if there's an interplay that way built into this, or we have thought about that much.
Yeah, the only scope over which this board would have any authority would be over fire code violations. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the answer.
Welcome.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, well, if you'll work with Councilmember Valdemoros, and then we will have our public hearing tonight and are scheduled for tentative action on the 12th. Okay.
Thank you very
y'all
much.
for being here.
Thank you. Thanks.
We are going to make a couple of adjustments on our agenda. We are going to pull item number 3 for further discussion, and we are going to move up item number 7 to right now. Sam Owen is going to be our council, well, he is our council office policy analyst with public utilities, and then Lisa Tarafelli and Jesse Stewart will join us at the table.
Sam. Howdy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The administration recommended and the council adopted changes to both the rate structure and the rates for the Department of Public Utilities, Sewer and Water Service, as well as changes to the stormwater service in the most recent fiscal year. The department has found that the impacts to the highest class, the highest intensity user of the city's sewer service were greater than anticipated. So they're back with a proposal to reduce the rate increase. It's still an increase over what it was in the previous fiscal year, but to reduce the increase for fiscal year 20 and conduct a little more research and outreach to evaluate just where those rates need to be and how they can mitigate potential impacts to the businesses that are the most intense users of the service. So with that.
Well, thanks for having us. Again, Jesse Stewart and Lisa Tarafelli. Lisa's our finance administrator and the deputy director. We also have Mr. Jamie West. He's the water reclamation facility administrator, and Mr. Terrence Price, who's our reclamation facility regulatory program manager, which includes pretreatment and various other duties. So they're in the back. So if there's technical questions, I will likely defer to my subject matter experts behind me. As Sam mentioned, during our rate study, we looked at a bunch of different rates for all the different classes of dischargers. When the consolidated fee schedule came out, we identified an error that had the Class 7s miscategorized, or the increase was not correct. So we're looking to bump them back to 18%. We'd take the fiscal year 18 rates and add 18% on, as we're doing for the other classes. And at the same time, we'll be reevaluating Class 7 dischargers for both flow and load or a combination thereof.
Great. Questions or comments for Public Utilities? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks. Jesse, can you tell us about why, or what was the lesson learned from the accidental 90%?
Lesson learned.
How will that not happen again? Or,
I think
or
we'll,
is there something we could have caught leading up to that?
I think we're going to be assessing that as we go forward. And I think one of the lessons learned is just another round of QC on how that went out. Again, we're not sure how that rate got put in there. It should have been around 18% at the 18% rate. So that's something we're just going to be more diligent on and
So
careful
Sam, from our side of things, I wonder, as they do their due diligence to unpack how that could have happened, I would love going forward if there's some step in the process that we can make sure in the staff reporting work leading up to the council's approval on those kind of increases, so that we can make sure all the T's are crossed and people get charged what we say we want them to be charged.
Absolutely. And I think one thing regarding charging, Lisa and Terry have been working with all the, I think there's 27 discharges in Class 7 out of 47,000. So it's a small number, but it's a big impact to them nonetheless. So that's not excusable. But we've been working with them to bring them back to the 18% so that that's what they're paying. So they're not going to be encumbered with a larger bill.
Great. Other questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And on this item, we will hold a public comment on November 12th and are set to take tentative action on November 19th. Now we will go back to item number 4, which is an ordinance for budget amendment number 2 for fiscal year 2019-2020. Ben Ledke is our policy analyst who will walk us through this item. Mary Beth Thompson and John Vike will join us at the table as well. And John, your tie's looking very sharp, so. All right, Ben, the time is yours.
This is the first briefing for budget amendment number 2 of fiscal year 20. The council is set to schedule the public hearing date tonight. The public hearing is on November 12th, potential action on November 19th. The budget amendment includes 11 adjustments proposed by the administration. Of these, 6 would be funded from the general fund balance, totaling just over $503,000. There are also 2 potential council added items, also funded from fund balance, which total $150,000. Before I go through the individual items, there's a request for a straw poll from the council, but I think we just lost our quorum. The requested straw poll is for early hire advertising. The Streets Division Director retired last month, and the administration is requesting the straw poll to post the job online. The position is currently merit, and they will be forwarding an amendment to the annual compensation plan to make the position appointed. The Public Services Department, most of the division directors are appointed and not merit, and this change would bring the position in line with that.
Okay, so just a question, why was this position not currently in line with the others?
I think that has to do with historically the person in the position was there for decades.
Okay.
Yeah, when the initial change was made for the other positions, that person had been there for many years and was essentially grandfathered in.
Okay,
So.
all right. All right, does that make sense? Does everyone understand the straw poll? Thumbs up that we support early hire advertising and an update to the compensation plan. Thumbs down that we oppose that. Do you have questions about it? Councilmember Johnston.
I mean, the question for me was related to, there's a difference between those who are right now and who aren't. Are there related, the remaining positions that are not merit, that are merit currently, set to be changed as well in the future?
You mean a position that essentially was grandfathered like this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Trails, Natural Lands, Urban Forestry, Galvin Division Directors are listed as folks that are current merit. Is the
Yeah.
intention they would move to or stay because they're different and fundamentally from the other positions?
My understanding is that those 3 division directors are at a pay grade 32, and they're merit, whereas all of the other division directors are at a higher pay grade of 35, and those are appointed. I believe the pay grade is the difference for merit versus appointed.
That's the only
So
difference?
it's not the position, it's the
Pay?
pay level.
That's my understanding. We can confirm with
is
the
that right?
administration.
I think we should probably come back with an
Okay.
answer for you.
Okay.
So we will follow up with that.
David Litvak from the mayor's office, do you happen to know that question off the top of your head? Okay, it's all right. No one else does either, so. Okay. All right, so without that information, are you still comfortable voting on the straw poll? Okay, so thumbs up that we support that, thumbs down that we oppose it. And that passes 4 yeses. Erin was out for the discussion, so she's not voting, and 2 others are not here, so. Great.
Typically, there are revenue updates and budget amendments, but it is too early in the fiscal year for updated numbers. We do have updated fund balance projections. There was a supplemental transmittal that was received shortly after the staff report was finalized and published, so that's not reflected in the staff report in front of you, but it is shown on the big screen in the corner. Fund balance increased $685,000, and this is related to funding for Operation Diversion. The funding was included in the annual budget for expense, $500,000 to VOA for mitigation and outreach related to homelessness, and $185,000 for cleanup in city parks. This $685,000 increase to fund balance is recognizing that funding will lapse to fund balance, even though we've already, in the annual budget, identified uses for it this fiscal year. And a point of clarification that these numbers are not the final audited numbers, so they could still change further when the CAFR is finished. Given these updated estimates, the fund balance above 13% is $547,906, and this is 13.16%.
Right?
Also, a quick
Questions or
update.
okay, Councilmember Mendenhall does have a question about that.
I think we talked during the budget about that it's disappointing that those funds couldn't be used because I think there's a need, but obviously the services weren't available. Have we had any follow-up conversations? I know that at this point we've already figured out how to spend the money, but with the county and the service providers that would have received that, if they've been able to expand services and the funds could actually be applied?
Not that I've heard of. So the question is basically, are there more treatment beds available to use the funds on or similar alternative uses?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, David Litvak has approached and sat himself at the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope I heard the question correctly. Yeah, we are actually having lots of conversations with the county. The issue is, as that money was initially appropriated, was to expand treatment. And it was also at the same time that the limited Medicaid expansion went into place, the targeted Medicaid expansion, referred to as TAM, targeted adult Medicaid. And so all the individuals that we were hoping to utilize the city funding for are actually now Medicaid eligible. And with the further expansion of Medicaid, that in a very positive way has opened up more access to funding for treatment beds. So that's where there was not a need for those dollars for the original purpose of expansion of treatment beds. The issue right now with treatment bed access is actually not one of beds itself, but actually the staff to serve individuals. But we are continuing to have conversations with the county around ways that funding can be utilized to meet the needs of the same target population.
To the staffing needs question, is that a matter of available workforce or funding to pay for the staffing?
Available workforce. And so there are, I only know I don't know much about this at all, but I do know that there are conversations with the county, for example, and county behavioral health, with the universities developing some initiatives to address the workforce shortage.
Good, thank you.
Councilmember Johnston.
There's a severe shortage of therapists. That's what there is, licensed therapists with master's degrees. It's hard to hire anybody right now in the field, bachelor's level or frontline staff, but there's a dearth of therapists available.
Okay. Thanks for that depressing bit of information, Councilmember Johnston. Okay, Ben.
Next is an update on impact fees. The current unallocated available to spend balances for the four general fund impact fee types are on the big screen and in the staff report. There are no expiring impact fees for the next 2 years for fire. It's slightly over a year for parks. This budget amendment does include a small refund of police impact fees, and the streets impact fees are just under a year away, and it's a large number. It's $877,713. However, this budget amendment includes in item A2 $455,000 of use, and the transportation section of the impact fee facilities plan is the furthest along in being updated. When it's updated, it'll have additional uses that would make it a bit easier to spend street impact fees.
Okay, and nearly 6,000 will be expiring from police impact fees this month?
Correct.
Okay. But no other impact fees are going to be refunded?
Correct.
All right. Okay, questions or comments about that? Okay.
That takes us to item A1. This is a request for $1.25 million in a capital account for landfill monitoring. This relates to a contractual obligation the city has to provide engineering services to the Valley Solid Waste Management Facility, commonly just called the landfill. The city is fully reimbursed by the county for these engineering services, some of which include bid solicitations. This is a periodic item that comes typically in a budget amendment every few fiscal years. It depends on how much engineering services the county is using from the city. I think it's been 2 or 3 years since this was before the council the last time.
Okay. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Just a comment that this, I understand we're contractually obliged and that there's a board, and I think Vicki Bennett sits on it or chairs it. But it's one of those things that feels so removed from us, and it's hard to not see what the RFP resulted in, and how strong was the solicitation, and how robust was the feedback, and so if there's ever opportunities for an update on like how robust is the process that says we need to free up this much money from CIP, even if it will be reimbursed, I'd love to learn more about how if they're doing their process as well as I think City Hall is doing our process.
We can request information on the last few years. Since the next update is a month away, I imagine we can get some of those details to share with the council.
Yeah, I'd like to know like how was the RFP advertised? How long? How many replies did they get? How did they make their selection? You know, some of those basic things that they can report on publicly to us.
Will do.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay.
The next item is A2. This is a request for $455,000 in street impact fees for a roundabout at the intersection of 2000 East and Parley's Canyon Boulevard. The intent is to improve safety and the flow of traffic. This intersection currently has 2 stop signs on 2000 East. There are no stop signs for the through traffic on Parley's Canyon Boulevard, and then there are 2 yield signs for turning onto 2000 East. The project is 100% eligible for street impact fees because a roundabout serves the same function as traffic signals. The other features that'll be added is a new bikeway, enhanced crosswalks for pedestrians, and replacing some of the road base. This is adding an additional element to a reconstruction project of 2000 East. That is from the Parley's Canyon Boulevard down to the southern city limit. So this is adding an element to a full reconstruction project that is planned in the near future.
Great. Questions about this one? Okay. Rude. Okay. The next one.
A3, this is a request for $120,230 from fund balance, and it includes 2 items. Both are staffing related for the Community and Neighborhoods Department. First is $70,230 for the interim CAN director. This is 4 months of their benefit and salary. In the annual budget, the council had captured 6 months of funding for this position as vacancy savings. This would restore 4 months of those vacancies. The second part is $50,000 for 3 or 4 part-time employees. The department has taken on several new projects this year, and there are other existing vacancies, and the part-time positions would help with some of those new projects. There are 2 policy questions for the council. The first is if the elevated workload is temporary, or if this could represent an ongoing level of service increase that may have ongoing staffing needs as well. The second policy question is if the council would like to learn more about specific tasks that the part-time staff are needed for, and whether there are other vacancies in the department that are contributing to the need.
Okay. Any questions or comments about this? Or would you like answers to those questions? I would like answers to those questions.
Okay.
As would Councilmember Fowler. And others.
We will ask the administration and get back to you for the November meeting.
Thank you.
The next item, A4, was withdrawn. A5 is a request for $200,000 for a rescope. These are funds that the council previously set aside in CIP to add new art elements to capital projects. The rescope is proposing to instead use the $200,000 for maintenance of existing art features. Of the $200,000, $40,000 would be spent on a study to determine the annual funding needs for the city's art. There are over 270 art pieces in the city's collection of public art. There are also several projects underway for your information. Three Creeks Confluence, the 9-line bike park murals, adding art to Glendale Park, the roundabout at 11th East and 9th South, and the I-15 North Temple pedestrian underpass art. These are all currently underway and using funds from the Percent for Art Fund. If the council approves this $200,000 rescope and taking into account these other projects currently underway, the Percent for Art will have a new available balance of $102,458. There's also a policy question. Does the council want to hold a policy discussion about art maintenance after the study results are finished? During CIP this year, the council expressed interest in holding that discussion, but it seems that the study results would be important context for your conversation.
Right. Councilmember Fowler.
Thanks, Ben. This is just to clarify. So the reappropriation of the $200,000 is to go for maintenance, right?
That is correct.
But that's not out of the Percent for Art Fund, right? Because I thought, based on what the ordinance you have there, I thought we couldn't use money from the Percent for Art for maintenance unless we change the ordinance.
So you can change the ordinance, or you can take the money out of that account so it's no longer governed by the
We're
ordinance.
taking it out for maintenance.
Correct.
I was backwards. Got it. Done. Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Johnston.
Mr. Chair, I agree. I think it would be important to have that information when we have our policy discussion about the maintenance funding. So I'd be okay waiting until that to talk about the maintenance.
Okay. Okay.
That takes us to item A6, the grant holding account increase. The grant holding account currently has a maximum of $2 million. This is a request to increase it to $3 million, so a $1 million increase. And this is in reaction to the city receiving larger grant awards, which is certainly a good thing. There are two policy questions. The first is if the council wants to make the funding contingent upon grants going through the current process, where the council holds a public hearing and then provides approval on the consent agenda. The second policy question is if the council would like an update from the administration on preparing resolutions and possibly ordinance amendments to codify and standardize this current practice for processing grants as well as donations. In Budget Amendment number 2 of last fiscal year, the council approved the legislative intent in the staff report and on the big screen, which requested that the grant and donation processes be codified. The current practice is certainly being followed, but it is not in ordinance. It's not in a resolution that the council has passed.
Okay. Yeah, Cindy.
There's an informal agreement between this administration and the previous administration on the grant applications, grant acceptance and awards, and the donations. The council is acting in a very trustful way in appropriating how many million?
It is $2 million currently.
And it'll go up to 3 if this is approved. So the council, in a sense, appropriates that money so that the administration, when they receive the grants, they can go ahead and begin spending that money from those grants. So there's always a little bit of a cushion there so that there's no delay. We were having trouble getting things processed quickly enough for it to get the money from the grants to get spent in a timely manner. So that's how this process was created, is to have a situation where the grant applications are disclosed to the council roughly when the applications go in, sometimes a little afterwards, and then the council has the opportunity to know what's being applied for, with the understanding that that's in kind of exchange, so to speak, as a courtesy, for the courtesy of advancing that money. So if the council wanted to be purists and the administration wanted to be purists, you could separate it out and have only do the appropriation once the grants were awarded. But what we'd found before is it wasn't the most efficient way to do it. So that's how we got here. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct.
And it's a little hard to explain to new administrations. And so that's why the codification.
And that's where the consent
suggestion.
agenda comes from as well. So when you give that consent, that's when we appropriate from that $2 million bucket to each of those grants. And until you give that consent, that just sits in that higher bucket. What's happened this year is that consent agenda 1 was $1.5 million. Well, I had consent agenda 2 ready to go. I had to hold back consent agenda 2 until budget amendment number 1 passed because consent agenda 2 was $1.5 million. So I was holding grants that I couldn't get passed because we haven't filled that bucket back up.
Okay. That clear? Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. And the second policy question. About preparing resolutions, ordinance amendments. Y'all good on that? Okay. Okay.
That takes us to A7 and A8, which have a combined write-up. This is a request to take a fiscal year 19 $240,000 appropriation and rescope it for energy efficiency improvements at the Sorensen Center. There is a separate fiscal year 20 $240,000 appropriation that is proposed to drop to fund balance for the refuse fund. Each year, these funds are used to provide the upfront cost for energy efficiency projects in different departments. There are currently no projects that are ready to use the funds for the rest of this fiscal year, hence the request to let it drop to fund balance. There was an analysis done of additional rooftop solar on municipal buildings. None of the locations that were analyzed are currently ready for rooftop solar. It actually concluded quite the opposite, that there are several repairs and roof replacements that need to be made first. An alternative use is the funds could be used for some of the incremental cost increases to purchase electric vehicles for the city's fleet. These vehicles are typically a little more expensive, but they are cheaper over the lifetime of use because they have lower fuel and maintenance costs compared to internal combustion vehicles.
Okay, questions? Okay.
That takes us to item A9. This is a request to use $56,000 from fund balance to upgrade cameras in the city and county building. The only policy question is if the council would like a closed session to discuss this with the administration about how the upgrades would fit into the security systems already in place or planned for this building.
Do we have, well, oh, yeah, would everyone like that discussed in a closed session? Okay, we will do that.
Okay. That takes
So
us.
just let us know when the administration's ready to talk about that. Great.
That takes us to A10. This is a request for $136,800 from fund balance for police overtime, and there are two different uses. The first is enhanced security staffing at the city and county building. This would be one additional police officer patrolling, and it would be for 8 hours a day. The second is 35 hours a week of overtime in city parks for police officers. There are two policy questions. The first is similar to what we just discussed. If you'd like this to be a closed session topic to discuss how the additional officer would fit into the security systems of the building and the grounds. The second policy question is if the council would like to know which city parks would see additional officers patrolling, how, if at all, this relates to the upcoming park ranger program, and if these are voluntary overtime shifts, could some of them go unfilled?
Ben, another point, so there's also an additional $100,000 that we have listed on here for police overtime, and so the question that I would have on that is if the council would be interested in combining both of those and increasing the scope to looking at all city parks and open space, and then giving the police department the leeway to follow up on specific complaints within specific parks and open space areas. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think I requested this council added item, although there could have been two of us asking for that. And it was actually specific to hotspots, not parks. And I do support this one for parks with the police overtime. That came out of a three community council conversation with the administration and police department that they held at PSB a while ago, asking specifically around Liberty Park, which has experienced a lot of drug use and encampments. But in addition to that, that the ballpark area and North Temple around the Gateway Inn have both experienced a number of homicides over the last couple of years, and what feels like a hot spot of activity in those areas. So that's where this additional overtime request was meant. I know that we can't direct the police of where to go.
Sure.
But this was about hot spots in neighborhoods.
Okay.
And there were 4 separate requests from council members. So you
you had one.
Yeah.
And then there was an
There were
additional
lots, yeah.
to supplement the parks and public lands piece. Do you recall what the other two were, Cindy? Or who made those?
I I have it written down in my office, sorry.
Okay. So to Councilmember Mendenhall,
Maybe-
do you recall what your request was for, or what the number was?
Well, I was hoping to be able to ask PD, and it's wonderful that Chief happens to be in the audience.
All right,
How
Chief,
far,
Chief Brown, if you could join us at the table.
so while he's coming up, if
Yeah.
there's a desire to grow the park ranger overtime, in this interim while they're hiring, maybe we add to that line item, and then I would like to ask that we look at this I-1 under the council added items, which is the funding for police officer overtime to patrol city parks, that be able to transition to a hotspot discussion.
Okay. And do you want to call it a hot, because the way that I would interpret hotspot is that, it would be wherever, if there's an immediate need where, we're seeing something either at, on North Temple or in the ballpark, but not excluded to that. If we want to limit it to those two, I think we ought to specifically call that out.
I don't, I was my understanding that we can't make that explicit direction of the police, but I'd love to know.
I think we could through either in the contingent appropriation. So before we do that, Councilmember Johnston, then Councilmember Fowler.
I think I'd like to ask Chief Brown, because there's an interplay between Utah Highway Patrol right now still, specifically downtown in certain neighborhoods, and Salt Lake City PD, and how that would work out with a hotspot sort of discussion. I think that funding is through June of this coming year. Is that correct?
If you're talking about the
State Department of
the Rio Grande
Through
funding,
Operation Rio Grande.
everything that I know is that funding ended June 30th of this year.
I thought it came through June of next year.
I think the funding for their officers will
Yeah.
be there, but not for our hotspot policing.
Not for hotspot
Yeah,
police.
no.
So their officers are funded, but are
Through June, right.
through June, but ours not. So
Correct.
I'd like to hear the interplay of how we would most effectively use overtime in light of that.
Okay. First off, Councilmember Fowler, is your question along those same lines, or do you want the chief to answer that first? Okay.
Say that again, Councilmember.
I think we're looking at allocating more overtime money for our Salt Lake City police officers to address hotspots or something along those lines in parks or the city.
Right.
I know on North Temple, Utah Highway Patrol has taken some of that, but that's where I don't want to sort of just say we're going to use it on a couple of hotspots like North Temple and places like that without getting your input about how it would be most effective to use with other resources.
I think on that, we would use it through our CompStat model, where it's based off intelligence and where we're seeing the trends or the hotspots that we're talking about. And we have definitely seen some along North Temple, and so I think that would be a good use. As far as the UHP, right now, a lot of their efforts are focused right on the Rio Grande specifically, or around the shelter down there. And the rest of the city is really where we focus our efforts. And so I think the money to use as hotspot policing would be used very well if we could use that and identify those hotspots. Does that answer your question?
The reason I brought it up, we've had a lot of UHP at North Temple, especially on 8th West there, and I didn't know if that was still their catchment area as far as what they're addressing with the overflow from Rio Grande.
No, I mean, not by agreement, but they're certainly welcome to go down there, and they do help out down there quite a bit. But we have recently, in the last 30 days, assigned a foot patrol down there just to talk to the businesses along North Temple and see how we can increase our presence and better serve that community. So,
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Fowler, then Councilmember Mendenhall.
Hi, Chief.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
I hear Councilmember Mendenhall talk about the community council meetings that this was discussed. I haven't had it discussed at any of mine yet, so I'm curious as to, and I only have one. I shouldn't say any because I'm blessed in that way. But I'm curious as to how hotspot is defined, and I think as to something that that Chairperson Luke said about not sort of, or I guess about making this funding contingent, I would hate to make it contingent on hotspots that have been identified, and then have those hotspots move, and then not be able to spend money, I don't know, say in Fairmont Park, where a new hotspot may be, because we've made it contingent on what has already been identified. So I guess I'm curious as to what the process is in identifying these hotspots. And for me, I see a little bit of a downfall of tying our hands before. I see a downfall of maybe potentially, I guess I should say, potentially tying our hands with a contingent appropriation on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's smart not to say it's specifically for this small area or that park or that street or whatever it might be. As you know, and we've talked about this for 4 years now, 4.5 years, we have used a CompStat model where we have looked at crime across the city, and we hold those meetings every 2 weeks, but our analysts, and we just increased our analysts, and it was through the efforts of the budget request and then your approval for new analysts last year, but we look at the data, if not daily, hourly, to see what's trending, what's up and what's down, and I think that's really lent to our success over the last 4 years to drop crime. And so when you talk about hotspots and where they are, we would look at that through our analysts, and it wouldn't be just, I think it's smart not to restrict it to just the Rio Grande area or North Temple, because we all know that where we put our efforts, crime moves. At times we weaken it, but it still moves, and we need to be able to move it to wherever it may go. So that would be my recommendation.
Councilmember Mendenhall, and then
Yeah,
Cindy.
I think part
and then
of
Chris, and then Cindy.
my desire for an explicit request for that ballpark area is that when we look at other crime rates, and you and I have had this conversation so many times, you could say that crime is decreasing in the area, but homicides are not. And the impact on a community of violent crime, however targeted or untargeted it may be, is incredibly detrimental.
Absolutely.
And so I think, saying like, well, it's not a hot spot. Well, people are being murdered there at an alarming rate, even if, car prowls may be on the decrease, or other types of crime. So this has been years.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a hour-to-hour kind of analysis. It's like, and it is difficult. It's redevelopment area that we need to get activated. It's a lot of components. There's new homeless resource center on both sides in a way, and there's a lot of pieces, but the neighborhood is asking. Mm-hmm. And you had sent some of your folks out to those meetings and to the anti-violence forum, and we're asking for that support in this area. And I don't know how to phrase it so that, I know in the old adage of we can add an officer, but we can't tell you what street corner to put him on.
Sure.
I'm asking you to put him on a street corner here. And I don't know how to do that appropriately. But it's not about a spike in all crime. It's about a specific presence in that neighborhood.
Right. And that's the hard thing, council member, is to measure what you're preventing and the peace of mind you're bringing to a community that has experienced the things that you're talking about. And so that would be, I think, would be considered a hot spot that we could use and address some of that money for, to assign those officers to those areas. But it goes back to the, we've been trying for years to fill up the beats. Every beat in this city needs an officer, and it would be very nice to do that. We're getting to that point, but this kind of dovetails into the park conversation. We talked about some money that would be set aside for the parks. We knew the funding ran out. So in September, we went to the graveyard shifts, and we focused a lot on Liberty Park. But the graveyard patrol officers went into the parks after curfew and reminded people that they couldn't be there. They made some arrests. They pushed those folks out, but it was driven by the complaints and the spikes that we were seeing in crime. To date, through those 3 weeks, we accomplished quite a bit. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't just a way to go in there and arrest people. During the day, our CIT and our host officers would go back and with our wraparound service and our social workers and provide service for those individuals. So, but in that time, 3 weeks from September 5th to September 22nd, we logged 69 hours into that database of officers working within that park. We made 7 field interviews, 271 consensual contacts, 11 traffic stops, 11 other pedestrians checked for suspicious activity, 2 traffic citations, 5 misdemeanor arrests, and a multiple of individuals were removed from the bathrooms at the park prior to securing them. So that's what we've been hearing as far as what they need in the parks. And so what I would like to propose and what we've looked at is we've met with the Parks Department just last week. The city has well over 80 parks. That's a lot of parks, but they have different district managers that are assigned to those parks. So we met with our CIU officers and the parks, and we've exchanged information. One of the biggest problems they had is people were stealing the locks or the tumblers out of the bathrooms, and they couldn't lock the parks or the bathrooms. And so they've changed the keys several times. So in our efforts to help them, we couldn't help them lock them up. So we now have a set of keys for all the officers in CIT, the watch commander. So there are numerous sets of keys that can be used to help in the parks. But more importantly, we talked to them and they said, look, these are the parks and these are the times we need the help. And so again, we're using Intel-led, specific directed policing efforts to help them. And so tonight, we're going to start our overtime park work. It's going to start at 10 o'clock and it's going to go to 2 in the morning. 2 officers, but we're going to go around to the parks that have been identified as needing the help and the officer's presence and lock those parks up. And we'll continue that. I know that we talked about 35 hours a week, 5 days a week. I think it needs to be 7 days a week. And so we're going to do 4 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I think through this money, about $60,000, we can accomplish from today through November, December, January, February. It tends to slow down within the parks, but we can pick up those efforts in March, April, May, and June. And that takes us to where we will now have our park rangers or the officers that we've hired trained and ready to go. So hopefully that fills the gap, but it does it very wisely using our intelligence to drive that
that's
money.
with the $135,000, $136,000 request that came from your office, right?
Yeah, that was the 60, and then the 86 was the other.
So a question that I have is, and then I'm not ignoring Councilmember Wharton or Cindy, but what's your overtime capacity? I mean, it's easy for us to sit up here and say, well, you know what, overtime is, you know, that's a great solution to get people on the ground immediately. But, you know, what is the capacity that your department has for that?
Council Chair, we'd have to look at that. I think we're going to be good. I can report back and let you know how those shifts are filling up, but it has hit our overtime system today. Officers should be signing up now, even as we speak. So I think we have the capacity to fill those shifts, especially when we're only talking 2 per day, 4 hours, 7 days a week.
And if we were going to increase the amount that we were appropriating, would you be able to spend that money on overtime, or would you be tapped out?
No, I guess we'd have to look at it, but I would really like to involve our park superintendent, the district managers within the parks to see where and how we can best allocate those monies. To see, you know, I don't want to just, I want to make sure we're using that money to the best of our ability to serve the parks and do the work that they need done.
So a bit ago you were just talking about Liberty Park and how much time you were spending. So you mentioned that you spent 69 hours in Liberty Park?
Yeah, that was over a 3-week period of time, from September 5th to September 22nd.
Okay.
And that's when we just told the graveyard officers, and this goes back to our community policing efforts. I mean, every park there's a beat, every park is in a beat, and there should be an officer in there. So using those beat officers at night, we went through the parks, especially Liberty Park, and made that concerted effort to remove those people that were camping in there. We made a few arrests, a few citations, but night after night after night to change the perception that the parks are the places that you can hang out at night. So if people aren't in the park at night, they're not there in the morning when people are coming back to jog or to use the park for whatever capacity they want. And that has really paid off. So
in 3 weeks of 69,000 in one park, and your budget amendment is asking for 35 hours for all parks? Or 35, is it per week that you're talking, or 35 hours?
we were talking 7 days a week, 4 hours a day, 2 officers, because we want them to ride as a two-officer car.
Okay.
So it's about 1,440 hours.
Okay.
To the tune of about 12,000 a month. And we feel like we can cover the 5 months of October, November, March, April, May, and June.
Okay. Councilmember Wharton, then Cindy, and then Councilmember Fowler.
So how does this relate to the upcoming park ranger program?
Well, I think right now we don't have, this is filling a gap. I think when the park rangers come on board, this squad will function very much like this overtime, but we'll take the sergeant and 5 officers and divide them up and use those in the hot spots or the various parks that we're seeing issues and problems.
Okay, so are you envisioning that the park ranger program is also going to be CompStat driven, or is there going to try to be a presence in every park, or?
Well, there's over 80 parks in the city.
Right.
I don't know if you can put every. That's a lot of parks.
Okay.
But there
Right. So
are.
maybe but are you going to try to give a certain? Is it going to be CompStat driven, or is it going to be geographically driven?
No, it'll be Intel-led policing.
Okay.
But we'd like to work with the park, the district managers of the parks, because they see the problems day in and day out. What we're doing is we're pushing people together so that we can leverage the ability and the work of our officers in the most efficient way.
Okay, so then Cindy, could if when we move into this program with park rangers, if it's going to be CompStat driven, is there a way for the council to ensure that there is geographic considerations that they're taking into place? Can we direct that, or is that the same problem as a hotspot, that we can't really say you go to the hotspot and then I'm going to tell you what a hotspot is?
Here, I'm going to answer that so that Cindy we don't get Cindy in trouble. My feeling is that as a council, while we can't necessarily say we want an officer on this corner at this time, I do think that it is fully within our purview if we are going to be appropriating money to be specific about how we want it appropriated. We can't tell them exactly how to do their job, but I think adding geographic distribution is more than fair since we are appropriating something that goes above and beyond what our normal budget includes.
Yeah.
That's my take.
Yeah, okay.
Cindy, am I wrong? Cindy doesn't want to answer, so I don't think I'm wrong.
You let me off the hook.
I let you off the hook and then I put you back on.
But Councilman Warden, Ben and Allison attend our CompStat almost every 2 weeks. And so they hear exactly what we're doing and the efforts that we're putting in, and that could be reported back. But there's crime, and then there's the perception of crime, and both are very important. And so the intel can also be, from what you're hearing from constituents, that there's a problem here or a concern here. We can staff for those issues too. It's not always that, this car prowl occurred here. There's the perception of what's happening in the communities we serve.
Right, yeah, and I just want to make sure that, underlying to my question is, I don't know that officers are finding the same types of crimes in all of our parks, but certainly the perception in my district is that they would like to have more officers in the parks after hours, and so, or clearing people out after hours. And like I said, I don't know that it's the same problems in all the parks, but I want to make sure that those residents are are being heard as well.
Right. And that's why when we met with the park staff, they said basically right now the bathrooms are the biggest concern. If we can make sure they're clear and lock them up at night, we know they're secure in the morning. So when our parks people come back in the morning, they're not going to open that door and find somebody that wants to assault them or a problem. Or so that was our focus, and that's what we were going to do right now.
Great.
Okay, Cindy, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
I'm sorry,
Before I
I
go to
have
Councilmember Johnston.
Oh.
No, before.
Okay, so these are questions that I want to ask the council. Is it worth asking the chief these questions? Okay, and first, apologies for limiting this to parks. Councilmember Mendenhall did talk to us about the hot spots as well. The bottom line that we think as staff is that the amount of resources requested by the police department plus the amount that we have put in as a placeholder is probably still not going to be a noticeably different situation on the ground, because if you eventually, when you have the park ranger program, you have 5 or 6 officers, you have training time, you have vacation time, you have sick time, and you have spreading them over 80 parks. So this is not a robust program, and it's not a panacea in any interpretation, I don't think. So just that raining on the parade, or just, being depressing. But first is a math question. The chief was talking about 4 hours times 7
No,
for 2 officers.
for 2 shifts at 4 hours each per day. There was a report that I think was submitted at 7 hours, 5 days a week or 35 a week. And we just felt like we need 7-day coverage because.
Yes. And Ben, and can we have these two tell us? I think it's 56 and not 30.
We have 100, I just calculated that, that's 112, as Ben and I were just sitting here
Yeah,
calculating
so
that.
the question is if it's 56 or 112 hours a week. So if it's 2 officers and they're each doing 4 hours a day, that would be 8 hours a day times 7, which gets us to 56. Or is there additional on top of that?
Is Shelley here? Where's Shelley?
And, sorry, we're always, just in this situation, actually accidentally underestimate sometimes.
Yeah.
It's better to know ahead of time if we're underestimating or if we're
I'll work
in
with
good
Ben and we'll come up with, if that's what the chief wants, is 2 FTEs, 7 days a week, 2 4-hour shifts. It's 112 hours times the hourly rate. We'll come back with you on that answer.
Okay. And then the next 2, I wanted to ask the council if you would like us to talk to the chief about this, whether the department is starting out with a little less overtime money than they usually would have or they've had in the past couple of years for the point they're at in the year. And the reason that I would ask that is the chief mentioned earlier that the city didn't put in the additional funding this year that it did in the previous couple of years for the Rio Grande area. So that would feel like you have a little less resource to draw from in the overtime budget. And then the very successful and very positive UN conference, that went very well, but it still took a lot of police overtime. And I don't know that the council allocated additional resources. So it's my guess that just being 4 months into this fiscal year, the chief probably doesn't have the level of overtime budget that he typically would have at this point for flexibility. Is that do you want to know that?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So those are just natural things that have occurred. So you don't have the one appropriation, and you did have to use a lot of overtime, which is totally appropriate. Is your budget, your overtime budget, 4 months into the year where it typically would be, or are you a little less than where you usually would be?
Can I get back to you on that one? That's going to take a little more math than I can do right
Okay.
here at the table.
Okay, all right. So, yeah. What I'm wondering is if maybe the 137 plus the 100,000 could just get you
I
to where
actually-
you are at this time of year anyway.
I actually have an idea that goes along those lines, but I'll bring it up after Councilmember Johnston and Mendenhall and Fowler ask their questions. But I appreciate where you're going, Cindy. Yep.
Well, Cindy hit one of my questions about overtime numbers, what we're looking at. The second question for me was, I like ComStat. My question is, could we see the data on what it's telling us about parks?
Yeah.
I'm coming from a concern about ComStat relates to reports, right? Not necessarily crime, but reports of.
Right.
So the volume of reports lead to a higher hotspot looking on ComStat, therefore more resources theoretically, depending on a lot of factors. If we have neighborhoods that aren't reporting in high quantities, it doesn't necessarily reflect that there's actually a problem there or not. And so some parks who don't get as much use because there's a perception it's unfair
Right.
or unsafe won't get a lot of people talking about it. So that's where the discussion about geography versus the actual numbers we're seeing in ComStat, I'd like to see that sort of discussion at some point on how we're going to rectify that piece, because I am concerned that places, Liberty Park's a great example, heavily used, a lot of eyes on, probably a lot of reports about a certain volume of either homeless individuals camping or crime or perceived crime, may get a higher volume of calls than another park that's less frequently used.
Right.
Or by as many people. So we can see sort of those spots where you get more resource necessarily, where it wouldn't necessarily be spread across areas of the city may need it just as much.
No,
So
I
just
agree.
need that sort of
Not
discussion.
everything is captured in a ComStat report. And you and I have spoke about street racing and some of the concerns you have. I do have an update on some of that if you'd ever like to talk about it. But we have done a lot of efforts out there in the last 4 weeks, and we're seeing a huge impact on what's happening. And so,
Now we're sort of putting out fires everywhere we go.
yeah, but that's hotspot
piece.
policing, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean?
So I'm interested in Councilor Luke's thought on what he was going to say, but I can wait till after the other discussion.
Councilmember Fowler. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Chief, the conversations, so forgive my questions if they're out of the moment. I want to know, as I think Councilmember Johnson just asked, how will you be deciding which parks? And before we went down the rabbit hole here, you were talking about, it sounded like you were talking about locking up bathrooms, but I'm not
Right
sure
now.
I
I'm
inferred
sorry.
that.
Yeah, right now, because we met, I mean, the people who are in the parks every day are the people that work for parks. And so we talked with them, and we have a list of the parks, and we know when they're going to close the bathrooms, and they've specifically said, these parks would be extremely helpful if you would lock those parks. So,
Can you give us a list of those?
Yeah.
And as a follow-up to this meeting? We had a public comment just last Tuesday from a District 2 resident, and we've seen pictures of other park bathrooms, and that's great to hear. This is really about addressing drug use, drug sales, paraphernalia that's left in the parks, and overnight encampment. And I appreciate that your job is to, in some ways, to bring us an efficient proposal. I think that a lot of what we've talked about is wanting a really effective proposal. And so finding if what you've brought us financially here in the ask
yeah.
is more efficient than it is as effective as we're asking for, I want to know what that amount is that we need to add for your folks to be able to do what needs to be done in our communities. Because hearing from residents all over the city, Fairmont included, out to Jordan Park and Liberty Park, who are cleaning up needles because they see a needle there and their kids playing over there. Like, we've got to dramatically shift this situation. And I know your folks do a great job, and they do even more than policing. But I don't want just an efficient proposal here. or an effective one too.
Right, yeah,
So-
and I do too. So, and maybe we can review this as we need to and see if our efforts are enough.
I'll be honest with you. What
Okay.
my hope is that we give you enough to do an effective job in these interim months while you're hiring the Park Ranger pilot program folks, and that by the time you get them on board, you can already tell that you need more.
Okay.
Because I think the need is that great. I think what Cindy said is really accurate, that 6 people, 80 parks, not that every single park needs to see people every day, but I think that that was a very efficient proposal and not necessarily as effective as we need. So I want us to be able to give you what you need to be effective.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I don't disagree with Aaron on that. I do, however, put my lawyer hat on, and I guess with that, I would like to define what hotspot is in something a little less abstract than it's where the calls come in because I think what we've heard today is that, you know, one park in one area may receive more calls, even though another park or another district or another neighborhood actually has more responses, right? Or what that looks like. And so, or responses to different types of crimes that maybe we're kind of counting as a little bit higher on the list of severity than something else, right? So, and in my discussion, before I were to ever agree to appropriate money to a certain location, I'd want to know what the definition is. And I think if we come up with a definition that's workable and usable, then it makes sense not to put a contingency on there, because you're going to have that definition that follows it. And the intent will be met by saying, well, this is the definition. We're looking at number of responses for X number of severe crimes or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. That's your department's answer. But I would like to see a definition of that and a less vague one, right? I don't mind working in vagueness sometimes. It helps my clients out quite often, but when we're spending money, I'd like to know a little bit more of how and where we can do that to be effective, right? I think the other thing is absolutely we want to make sure we're being both efficient and wise with how we spend money, but again, also effective. I guess my question, I don't know if this is so much for your department as it is for us, how do we define effectiveness? Right? Is that now we have 0 people experiencing homelessness in any of our parks, or right? I don't know the answer to that. But again, in order to, in my opinion, to make sure that we're giving you the money, I also feel like we need to understand how effective is defined.
Yeah.
Because I agree with what everybody has said here, and I think that we have seen over several years and probably decades of different areas being different hotspots or different parks needing more attention, or however that looks. But I think, again, this is sort of probably just my lawyer brain. What's the definition of those things? Instead of just kind of throwing out the word, but creating something by which we can actually have some measurements so that when we come back, we can say, absolutely, your program is working with the graveyard shift. And here's both the efficiency and the effectiveness of it. But without that definition, I think that would be hard to judge. So I would ask, you know, I've come a long way with you, Chief, because I used to sit up here and but with your department, because of the steps that you guys have been making, and I appreciate that. So I support a lot of everything really that's been said. I just think we need to hone in a little bit on those details for me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I wish we could capture it in 1 or 2 sentences, but it's a little more than that. And it's not always on a CompStat sheet. And it's what you are hearing in the meetings when you're visiting with people. So, I mean, it's a lot of things that weigh in as if we're making a difference. So all of that would be, I think, a good measure or a good definition of what we're going to do on the back end and front end.
So here's kind of what I'm thinking, and let me know if it fits with what you're. But having listened to this conversation, you know, we've asked the chief a number of questions. And this is precisely why a lot of the other department folks are like shaking their fist at you behind your back because you can't see them. Okay, they're really not. But, you know, here you have a council ready to give you more money than you requested.
Yeah.
And that is not, you know, that is frustrating to the other departments. But it's because, as I've told you before, Chief, you know, if you come to us with a legitimate proposal and something that, you know, a legitimate need, it will be funded. I mean, that is how, you know, this council always has been, and we're always ready to step up and do that.
No, and I know that.
What my questions are, there are a couple of questions that we're not set to take action on this until the 12th. So you have time to dig into this. But what I would like to see is, based on what Cindy was asking, where are you now with your current your current overtime budget compared to where you've been in the past? This is in no way am I asking to deride your management. There's been a lot of issues that you've all had to deal with this year that you haven't had to deal with before. But it's for us, as the appropriating body, it's important for us to know that. So where your budget is this year as opposed to last year, what your capacity is to add more overtime. I am, based on the discussion, I personally am ready, and I think the council may be ready to look at increasing your the $137,000 proposal that you've put forward in order to make it real. I worry that what we're doing is a stopgap, and stopgaps are good, but when we talk about a stopgap in a meeting like this, it gives a sense of it gives the public the false sense that they're actually going to see something much different than they will be seeing. I mean, and again, it's not. I'm not being critical, but it's very, very minimal as to what this will be. I'm sensing that there may be an interest in increasing that. So let us know what your capacity is.
Okay.
To Councilmember Mendenhall's point about having additional resources, I'm always going to be somewhat hesitant to narrow something so geographically. But at the same time, there is a definite issue. There is data that backs that issue up. And so what I would also like to see, in addition to the park budget, while your new officers are currently going through the training, if you would have the capacity and what your capacity would be to come up with a better defined hotspot plan. The hotspot, as Councilmember Wharton said, is the new lockbox. I don't want that. I don't want to have any man, bear, pig conversations up here. I want let's have real numbers. And a real plan. And so what I would like to see is a beefed up proposal for your parks survey, or your parks crew, and the whatever we want to call it, the not to be named hotspot plan. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And if you could get us that information, because what I don't want to appropriate money that you can't spend.
Right.
And I don't want to work your current officers to the point where you're having additional morale problems. So, I know that there's a fine line there. So let us know what that is. And if you could come back to us within probably 2 weeks, just so that we have time to digest and work with Mary Beth, and that way, I think we have something that we'll be able to digest. Council, does that make sense? Do you want to alter that in any way? Okay, Councilmember Valdemoros.
At the end of the day, and I agree with all of what was said, but I just we need to, when we go to the community councils, when we talk to our constituents, they ask us these questions, and it's hard sometimes to explain it in a straightforward way, and then they have expectations that we cannot meet. So I think that's what we're asking for, more clarification and a clearer plan, so that we can digest and then we can actually tell our, because this is what the chief proposes, this is what he's trying to achieve, and I think if we appropriate this funding, this will happen. So here's the whole picture for you guys, and that way, we don't get calls back saying, you put more money into this and nothing has happened.
Right.
So that's, when you think about these things, please think it that way as well, as help me.
Sure.
Help me,
Yeah.
help you, please, to tell people what your plan is, because we trust you. You're the boss. You tell us
Okay.
how you're gonna tackle some of these issues that we're hearing,
Sure.
that we're seeing, that we're not hearing. We know it's happening out there.
So
I
is
appreciate your
2 weeks
comments.
reasonable? I mean, I know it's tight, but the only reason that I'm putting some pressure on it is because we're set to adopt this at our next meeting. And we're not meeting until November 12th, which is why you have a little bit more time than you normally do, but still not a ton of time to come up with, a revamped and then a second plan.
Clarification, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The November 19th meeting is adoption of Budget Amendment number 2, so you have one additional week.
Oh, okay.
So
There we go.
3 weeks?
Don't you think that you would want to know?
I think if
this is a
knowing
pretty
knowing
big
before,
issue.
knowing before then, just so that we can work through it.
Yeah, you want to have another discussion, I would think.
Yeah, and I think the 12th would be the day for that additional discussion, if we have an additional week. So if we're not passing it until the 19th, what I'd like to do is schedule another briefing for the 12th. But if you could get us both of those proposals before then, so that we have time to fully review them before the work session, that would be helpful. Does that
Okay.
work?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Other issues related to this budget item? Thanks for going with the flow, Chief, with us on this.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Okay.
That takes us to A11, which was withdrawn. A12 is a request for $27,000 from fund balance. This is for a new FTE, a full-time employee in the Community and Neighborhoods Department. The position is the Capital Improvement Program and Impact Fee Administrator. The $27,000 would pay for 3 months of salary and benefits. The annual cost would be $108,000, which, if the council approves, this funding would be built into the base budget for the next fiscal year. There are 3 primary duties that the position would focus on. The first is the annual capital improvement program process, the impact fee facilities plan updates, as well as implementation and tracking of the impact fees, and the capital facilities plan, which is a 10-year CIP plan. There are 2 policy questions for the council. The first is how this position fits into the existing CIP and impact fees team in the department, if it would be increasing the size of the team, and if the council would like to see a job description for additional details. The other question is if additional funding was provided beyond 3 months, if there are CIP and impact fee projects that would be able to move forward faster.
Questions or? Okay, Councilmember Johnston. Okay, Councilmember Johnston does not have a question, but Councilmember Mendenhall does.
Well, I think he was saying we'd like answers to those questions. And why only 3 months of funding?
Only 3 months was requested because it was assumed it would take probably another 3 months to advertise and hire and onboard the position. I don't know if that could be sped up.
But even that leaves them out a few months.
About a month.
A month of gap funding. That's weird. So then you'd be coming back to us in a budget amendment in the spring to fill, if it took 3 months and someone's on board and we only have 3 months of funding and there's a gap before the next.
Yeah, I think that we should look at that. Thinking through this, I mean, so if they want this person to be the person that's in charge, they probably should be here prior to
The
you
budget.
get in depth with the budget, right? Because this person has to work through that. I would
clever.
recommend probably more than 3 months worth of budget, if the council would consider that, just because I think that you need this person on board to help you through that process. And I don't want that person to be me.
How do you really feel? But can you answer those questions for us?
Absolutely.
Right
Oh,
now?
now? Well, I think that Jen McGrath can help answer these questions. Now?
Or okay, let me ask this. So if we don't have the answers now, can we do the same thing that we just did with the chief, where you could get us the answers in 2 weeks, in enough time before our next hearing, or our next public hearing, or not public hearing, but our next work session on the 12th? Okay. Yes, Cindy, with a related question.
The council a few years ago added a position to the HAND division of community. Sorry, the council a few years ago added a position to the HAND Division of Community and Neighborhoods, and the position was specifically funded in order to make the link between the capital improvement program and the city's master plans. And then the council modified it a little bit at the division and department's request so that it could be the second deputy director as well as fill that role of master plan CIP coordination. I'm not sure if the position, with so many changes, it's possible that that position is not fulfilling the function that the council a long time ago set it up to fulfill. That's nobody's fault. It's just a circumstance of the changes. And I don't know that for certain. I'm speculating. So would you like us, first of all, is that still something important? Would you like us to get back to you with that information while we're doing this? Because I think the two positions relate.
Yeah, I think it would be very helpful to get back with us on that.
We'll follow up.
You also do it within 2 weeks? Just kidding.
Yes, we'll talk to our friends from CAN.
Great. Thank you.
That takes us to item A13. This is not shown in the staff report. It was the supplemental transmittal that was received later. I'm putting the write-up up on the big screen. The request is for transition expenses related to elected official transitions for the current election cycle. It is just over $163,000 from fund balance, and it includes 3 components. The first is $71,695 for office space, equipment, technology, and furniture. The second is $35,000 for a mayoral portrait. The third item is $56,353 for personnel costs, and the positions would be a newly elected mayor, a chief of staff, an assistant, and up to 3 council members. If any of these funds are not used, they would lapse to fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. And per the city ordinance, it's number 73 of 2015, the transition period is defined as the day after the election results are canvassed. This is currently scheduled for November 19th until the day the oath of office is taken, the first Monday in January.
Great. Councilmember Mendenhall.
When we set this up, didn't we have the conversation about, do we want to put a little bit aside every year, or do we want to just do it all the year of, and we decided to do it all the year of?
I recently read the ordinance, and it says that the funding can be placed in the annual budget or a budget amendment. So it was left flexible as to the timing of putting the funds aside for this use.
I guess I just mean we weren't stocking money away to lead up to this.
No, because it would lapse to fund balance every year. So
Okay.
that was a conversation, but it was.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments about this budget
I have one
amendment?
more question about that one.
Yes.
I remember it, or it seemed to me that it took a little while for Mayor Becker to get his portrait done, like several years after he left office. And I just wondered if we have, if that amount that we set years ago now is sufficient for
The
Mayor.
different amount than we have
it
had
is.
before.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it's at the discretion of the mayor how long they take to choose an artist and that type of a thing.
I just want to make sure
Yeah.
it's enough for Mayor Biskupski's
We did the evaluation, and it's enough for Mayor Biskupski's portrait.
Great.
There are a couple housekeeping items and council-added items to also go over. Item D1 is a request for $135,628 from the general fund balance. And this is for services to Harriman City and Riverton City by the Salt Lake City Police Department. It is for software subscriptions for record management systems, mobile data terminals, and mobile report entries. The two cities will fully reimburse the city. There are existing contracts, and this appears to be a new service that is being provided. Harriman and Riverton cities recently left the Unified Police Department. The policy question is if this could create ongoing staffing needs, and if the council would like to see copies of the contract.
I think we're okay.
Okay. Item D2 is a request for $1.5 million budget increase in anticipation of early loan payoffs from the HOME. This is a federal grant program administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Staff is working with the administration to clarify some of the information, so we'll come back with more details for you.
Okay.
I'm going to jump to item D7. This is $1,031,000 that is proposed to go back to the surplus land fund. These funds were originally appropriated to assist with purchasing land for the new homeless resource centers. The funding was not used, and the administration is proposing that it return to the account it came from, the surplus land fund. If this is approved, the surplus land fund would have a balance of just over $2.1 million. We're following up with the administration about how much was initially set aside, if this was the full amount, and why it was not needed.
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
The city put up some money up front for the purchase of property and was reimbursed by county, state, someone. So we anticipated being reimbursed for this money that was put out. Was this not true, Mary Beth?
So we put up two sets of funding. One was from surplus land, the other one was from RDA. The RDA funding got used and was reimbursed. This funding never got used. And so as I was going through the surplus land and questions were being asked, this amount came up. It is the total amount of the budget. None of it has been used. And I said, we need to put it back to surplus land. We're not going to purchase another piece of property for HRCs. To be transparent, it needs to go back in the surplus land main account.
So it isn't that we didn't contribute it and then we were supposed to, it's that we were setting it aside in case we needed to provide it up front.
Correct.
Councilmember Fowler.
Sorry, can I go back to D2 real quick? Weren't we just there talking about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if you said this, but there are some policy questions there. I don't expect an answer today, but can we make sure we get the answers to those policy questions? I'm very interested in a couple of these things here.
Noted.
Thank you.
And then the last item is staff wants to point out placeholder item I2 as a council added item, and this is a follow-up from budget amendment number 1. There should be a letter circulating today for council member review about the $50,000 matching funds for additional school crossing guards, and it's a letter from the council to the Salt Lake City School District Board of Education. If the council wants to adjust that contingent appropriation or that use, this is a placeholder added in so that that flexibility is preserved at your November meetings.
Okay.
That is it.
All right. Any additional questions or comments? Okay. Thank you all very much for your time and thoroughness on this issue. Our next item is another budget amendment. It's an ordinance regarding budget amendment number 3 for fiscal year 2019-2020. This budget amendment is primarily dealing with the airport. So Mary Beth and John will stay at the table. Bill Wyatt will also join us. Bill is the airport director, and Brian Butler is the airport finance director, and Ben will walk us through this as well. Then we have additional airport staff in the audience for the next item that we will move into right after this budget amendment discussion.
And while we're getting situated, I'll just do a quick intro, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
This item, budget amendment number 3, is scheduled for a public hearing tonight and council action on November 12th. The airport has a presentation for you. The budget amendment is requesting an increase of $496 million. This falls into 2 parts. $377 million for the terminal redevelopment program and $119 million for the North Concourse program. The total budget for the redevelopment project at the airport is now over $4 billion. The amount being increased, the $496 million, is mostly coming to allocate existing cash resources. This will allow increased space and security modifications, as well as taxi lane designs and construction, and several technology systems. The airport has seen faster passenger growth than was forecasted. It's been hovering around 5% for the last 5 fiscal years. And just
You
to
just
note,
used the word hovering in airport. Sorry.
I did. There's also a council added item we can get to after the presentation.
Great.
So I think this, Council Chair Luke and members of the council, I'm Bill Wyatt, Executive Director of Airports for Salt Lake City. Glad to be here with you. This chart really says just about everything you need to know about what's been transpiring at the airport for the last several years. And I'm told, yeah, it works here. You can see this period here of employments is when the project was being planned. And you can see that employments were either flat or slightly down. And so that is the picture that was in the heads of those working on the design for the current airport. And you can see this number going up here. These are actual employments. And just about the time the shovel went into the ground, actual employments started going up much more substantially than had been forecast by the carriers at the time. So we've used typically a forecast which we had agreed to with Delta way back in the day of 1.5% per year. The reality has been 5 or 6% a year compounded since 2014. And about a year ago, we began to realize, as did Delta and the other carriers, that we were building a facility that was not going to be adequate for the volume of passengers that we would have expected on opening day. And if you can see here, this is that 1.5% forecast. So we're looking at opening here with 12 million employments, which is just passengers getting on the plane. And yet we're going to open up here with about 14, having a hard time seeing that, with about 14 million. So 2 million more than we'd actually anticipated on opening day. And that drove Delta, in their case, to seek, for example, a substantially increased Sky Club. And they were going to have a Sky Club of 18,000 square feet. Now it's going to be 27,000 square feet. We added a sterile corridor, and you'll see later in this presentation that international passenger volumes are substantially higher than anyone anticipated back in the period of 2010 to 2012. We've increased the size and the nature of the Federal Inspection Station where arriving passengers clear immigration and customs. All of these to accommodate a level of volume that nobody really anticipated in that period of 2010, 2011, 2012, when most of the work was being done. This is a really good news story, as you'll see, because it's being driven by actual business, and most of that business is right here in this valley. In other words, the passenger volumes are growing because of local traffic. So here you can see that, the cumulative employment growth since 2010. The dark blue are local passengers. We call them O&D, origination and destination. And the sort of purplish, pinkish are connecting passengers, and both have increased. but obviously the local traffic has increased more, and that's really just a reflection of what's been happening with the economy along the Wasatch Front. When the economy is good, people fly, and that is certainly the case here. And you can see the level of increase, both the share for O&D, which has gone up, and that is, by the way, always considered to be a good thing in airports. The rating agencies love that because it reflects a strong economy in the local market. Here is a little picture on international traffic. You can see that the number of flights has increased, but the volume of passengers has increased dramatically. And frankly, when we open the new terminal in 335 days approximately, we'll see that number grow again because we simply don't have room for the kind of traffic that we anticipate. South and Central America, Asia, I'm very confident we'll see significant growth there as soon as we have room for it. This is, on the left, what the project looked like when the airline use agreement was approved. At that kind of moment, Delta was basically going to stay over here in the finger piers, and the other carriers would come down here on the east and the west. And shortly after this decision was made, Delta changed their mind, and the scope of the airport redevelopment program really changed significantly to 2 parallel concourses. Now I'm going to turn this over to our chief engineer, Kevin Robbins, to talk about some of the specific changes that are deriving this.
Thank you. This obviously is a good story. Having to expand a building while you're building it is difficult, but our team has been able to handle that. So the request here is we're looking forward to the end of the program, which is all the way out through, I remind everybody, 7 more years, out through 2026 is when it will take. It'll take us that long to tear down the old facilities, build the new, complete all the apron paving. So it's a very long program. We did start construction in 2014, so we've already been at it 5 years, and we have 7 more years to go. So this slide really just highlights the major changes that are driving the increase to the budget. Starting at the top, in our original plan, we were going to close the tunnel that we currently have that connects the terminal area up to our support facilities, which houses the fuel farm, our airport maintenance facilities, and Delta's and SkyWest hangars. We were going to close that tunnel because the current approach ends up coming up right in the middle of the North Concourse. We've determined that with the amount of traffic that goes back and forth, we need to keep that tunnel open. So the one modification that we're going to make to be able to reduce vehicle miles traveled back and forth will be to turn that approach so that we can still use the tunnel instead of forcing all those vehicles to go clear back to the west and backtrack to the east. Similarly, at the top of the slide is the taxi lane XX extension. As we looked at the flight schedules coming in and the activity around the concourses, one of the major benefits to this linear approach is that the aircraft can get in and out very quickly. However, on the north side of the remote concourse, we have a dead-end taxi lane that does not connect all the way over to the right to the parallel taxiway for the center runway. So we determined that it would really increase efficiency and reduce taxi times if we went ahead and continued that extension and connect that taxi lane in to taxiway Gulf at this time. We had originally planned to do that in a future phase with phase 3 when those additional gates on the north were built. However, we are concerned that we need the ability to, again, increase the capacity to be able to get back and forth to those taxiways.
Councilmember Mendenhall has a question.
Yes.
Will you just say that again in an easier way to understand?
Sure.
Because when I look at the north and then I look at the south, they look the same to me, and I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, on the north, the difference being on the north is that those aircraft, the south, we were constrained by the pocket that we had to have with the terminal. We did not have enough space to be able to put a taxi lane that went all the way through there. So on the south, those aircraft will go out to the west and will go out to the east. On the north, without building that taxi lane extension, all of the aircraft will have to come in and exit essentially off to the left-hand side or through the cross taxi lanes. And we believe that the traffic requires the ability to be able to go directly to the center runway as opposed to having to backtrack and go back west to go east.
And even though it may not seem that way, as you'll see in the next presentation, projects like this are environmental projects because it just means you're burning less fuel and you're getting to and from your gate to the runway or back to the gate more quickly, which is always a good thing. And it's one of the real features of the whole project. You're not going to have that experience. What you do today, you land and the pilot comes on and says, "Oh, you're early. Oh, that's terrific." And then you pull up to the throat and wait there for 10 minutes with the engines burning while another aircraft clears out of the way. So the addition of this really is a significant improvement.
Did that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Mr. Wyatt mentioned on the sterile corridor that we are making some modifications there. Because of the growth in international traffic, we actually added more gates into that sterile corridor that will allow international arriving passengers to process down into the Customs and Border Patrol area. So we added an additional gate up to 6 gates. And then as we looked at how those gates operate, because they're able to swing between domestic use and international use through interlocking doors in that corridor, we were asked by the airlines to look at actually double-decking the corridor so that they could be basically operated instead of a single group of 6 gates, they could be operated as 2 groups of 3. So it gives more flexibility for the airlines using those gates between international and domestic.
Another dumb question, sterile corridor?
So when you, go ahead.
I was going to say sterile corridor, that's a term that Customs and Border Patrol uses, that as an international passenger arrives, they essentially they have not entered the United States yet, so they need to keep them separated from any contact with any other passengers. So they use the term sterile.
Thank you.
It'll be clean as well, though.
That's what it sounded like, but I feel gross on airplanes. I didn't know if there was a cleaner way to travel.
That reminds me of something. Is there a way, will people, so currently when you go through customs, there's no bathroom, right? But while you're waiting to come in.
Yes, there is.
Oh, there is?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's prior to the immigration counters.
Okay.
But once you pass through immigration, you do not have access back to that restroom.
Okay. So once you get in line to start coming through customs, then you can't go back to the bathroom, but you can.
Once you clear immigration, you're then in the United States. You can't go back into the federal inspection station.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. And will that still be the case in the new airport, that there'll be a bathroom before customs?
Yes, that is the case.
Okay.
That leads to perfect segue to the next expansion, which is the expansion of the Customs and Border Protection area. Again, with the international growth that we're having, we looked at what we had designed the terminal for, and as Bill mentioned in the slide, we've tripled the number of passengers that are processing through that area. So we worked with Customs and Border Patrol to look at how can we process passengers more efficiently. We've added 2 additional bays to the building to handle that process, added an additional carousel, and we're actually changing the way passengers will be processed with the bags first. You'll collect your bags, then you will go through the immigration counters, and there are restrooms there as you're waiting to collect your bags. So
great.
we think it will work very well.
Yeah.
Another item that affects the budget is the hard stand operation. This is a request that actually Delta came to us with, which was they were willing to bus their passengers out to the regional jets in order to allow us to open all 6 international gates on opening day. So beginning in January, Delta will be busing their passengers to some of their SkyWest connection flights that were using Concourse E. That allows us to demolish Concourse E earlier, and then we can open all 6 international gates on September 15th rather than having to wait for several months after the terminal opens. Bill already mentioned the Sky Club expansion, which Delta requested. The last item that's driving this budget increase is the purchase of enhanced TSA screening equipment. With the growth that we're experiencing, we're always working with TSA and looking how to process passengers faster. So we are going to buy some automatic screening lane equipment. Those of you traveling may have already used that, where you are able to divest 3 or 4 at a time. You put everything into bins, and then they're fed automatically into the x-rays. So we are buying that equipment and installing it and then gifting it to TSA to be able to enhance that. So those are the major scope items that we have added that are driving the cost increase. So on the next slide, the overall for the airport redevelopment program, combination of both the terminal redevelopment and the North Concourse program, the overall increase is $496 million. The increase that we've also added is an $86 million increase to our ongoing capital improvement program. We originally had budgeted a $40 million ongoing capital investment program for runways, taxiway maintenance. Over the last few years, we had not quite spent that much, so we had adjusted the model down, but we believe that in trying to look at a worst-case scenario, that we should go back to the $40 million placeholder. So there's no specific projects that are really identified with that. It's really a placeholder to go back how we started the modeling for the airlines. I won't go through the next 2 or 3 slides. That just really provides more detail that you can look at as to the specific areas that these expenditures will be made. And then I'll turn it over to Brian Butler, our Chief Financial Officer, to talk about how this impacts our plan of finance and the impacts to the airlines.
Go ahead.
Let's just see. Okay, this is working. So one just point of clarification, the budget amendment is $496 million, and that's for the airport redevelopment program. The additional construction cost, while we present it in this presentation, that would be budgeted on an annual basis as we identify those projects. So that is technically outside of the scope of the budget amendment. But my goal as a CFO is to figure out how do we pay for this increased cost. And so at the airport, you'll see on the slides over here, this is what we call our plan of finance. And the reason we include that other construction cost is we have to figure out how do we pay for those other construction costs as well. And so Bill and Kevin have kind of talked to you about the growth that we've experienced at the airport. We've both experienced that as far as passengers going through the facilities, but we've also seen that growth as far as the scope of the project. You know, originally it was a $1.8 billion project. We've always been conservative. We never wanted to overbuild. We never wanted to overborrow funds from the debt market. And so you've seen that as we've experienced these periods of expanded growth, we've increased the scope of the project, and we've kind of made those changes during construction while it's much more cost effective and much less disruptive to the passenger experience. And so that's why you're seeing these big costs come through today, is we just continue to forecast 1.5% growth, but the reality is we're doing 5 to 6% growth. So real quickly, the plan of finance, what it is, it's a very complex model. It basically forecasts our future revenue streams. We build into our operating expenses for the facilities, and then we lay into our construction costs. And so the first exercise I did is I basically took the added $500 million of project cost and put it in the model and said, how are we going to pay for that? Now, the growth that we've experienced is also paying for the growth in these project costs, and it's primarily paid by the airlines. And so a common term we use in the airport industry is a cost per in-plane passenger. That's what the airlines measure us against other airports to see how profitable it is for them to fly a passenger into Salt Lake versus LAX, Phoenix, Denver. And so when I originally laid the project costs into the model, it increased the cost per in-plane passenger about $2.50. Just to put that into perspective today, For fiscal year 19, our cost per in-plane passenger was $3.90. So there was a significant cost, as you would expect with a $500 million of scope additions. What I then did is I went and looked at the assumptions. And in our model, we are, just like when we were building it, we're very conservative. We put very conservative forecasts in the model. And so when we look at the enplanements, for fiscal year 19, we had budgeted 12.1 million enplanements. Reality is we flew in 13.1 million. So that's 1 million more passengers passing through your facility. What that does is it drives up your car rentals, your parking, your food and beverage, your retail. It creates a lot more revenue in the model. And so we basically adjusted kind of the enplanements to reflect what they are today, but then we kept the conservative forecast going forward. You know, there's a lot of talk in the airport industry as well as probably in City Council, when's the next recession going to hit? It's not a matter of if, but when. We feel that with the conservative forecast, even though we continue to have these 5% years of growth, that if we do have a recession, that the conservative growth would basically cover us. So we adjusted the enplanements, which generated about approximately $180 million more of cash that the airport's going to contribute to the project. The other thing we looked at is the borrowing cost in the model. We were very conservative. If you've been following the interest rates, they've been coming down quite a bit lately. Kind of a turn from where they were going. They were increasing quite a bit. And so we've adjusted the borrowing cost in the model. And so once we do all of these, and I'm oversimplifying it, what it ends up being is for $500 million, we only have to go to the bond market for about $375 million of those project costs, because we're contributing quite a bit more cash to it, as well as we looked at all of these other revenue sources, whether it's passenger facility charges, which is a charge you get charged when you book a plane ticket, and then we get to use that, and we have to invest it in the airport. Same with the customer facility charges. It's for the rental car agencies. The airport improvement program, those are grants provided by the federal government. You know, we looked at that. We looked at our revenue streams. And so all said, it basically kicked out a CPE on the next slide. Bill, if I can have you just push that through one more. So a year ago, we went to the bond market. We issued $850 million worth of bonds. And at that time, we told them at 2028, we project the cost per in-plane passenger to be $14.20. Originally, when I put it in the model, it came in at about $16.25. After we've made these very conservative adjustments, you know, we've brought these project costs down to $14.88. So really it speaks to the growth that we're having is largely paying for the growth that we're seeing in these project costs. So with that.
Yeah, I might just say going forward, so next year and the year beyond, we're still using that 1.5% passenger enplanement forecast because we want to be conservative. On the other hand, if we have another year, one more year of 5 or 6% growth, that $14.88 is probably going to be very close to where we had forecast without the budget increase. So this chart really is just telling you that the growth that we are now accounting for with these scope changes is paying for the cost of them, which is a great story.
Right. Before we go to additional questions and comments, Bill, can you introduce Donnell Harvey?
Yes, I can. Where is he? He's right here. Donnell Harvey, who is the corporate real estate representative from Delta Airlines. And Donnell and I have known each other for almost 20 years because he was in Portland and was conveniently reassigned to Salt Lake City right before I got here. So I might say that Delta has formally approved the scope changes and the budget amendment, which is a requirement of our airline use agreement.
Right. Well, I know Mr. Harvey flew in for this meeting, so thank you very much for being here, and welcome to Salt Lake City, our council meeting. Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. A couple of things real quick. First, welcome, and thank you for sitting through city council meetings. I don't know that I would do it if I wasn't here. Just kidding, I would. We're entertaining. Second thing, I love hearing that one of our departments is paying for, the revenue is paying for, the growth is paying for the development, and that's amazing and awesome, and I look forward to all of this. But third, and really the most important thing, is that I want to thank you and your team, Bill, I flew for the first time since the budget, or that's not true, but I flew recently. I flew this weekend over to Denver and noticed the free menstrual hygiene machines in our bathrooms.
Yeah.
And I want to say that I sent you the video, but I totally geeked out, right? And took a picture of it, and everybody in the bathroom was like, "What is this lady doing?" And I like checked it out and did the whole thing. And then I took a picture in the Denver airport where they charge 50 cents for menstrual hygiene products.
Let's get some coverage on that. Yeah.
I want to say that I am extremely, extremely proud of this council for taking that step, but for you for being our first enterprise fund to implement that very unique and dynamic, and in my opinion, it's something that really speaks to who we are in Salt Lake City, of being inclusive in every possible way that we can think of. And that is one of the ways, and it just it makes me ridiculously giddy. And so thank you so much for really taking the lead on that and being an example, not just for here in Salt Lake City, but I'd say airports across the country. So.
Well, thank you. And I would just say, first of all, thank you for bringing that to us, because we're always open and looking for new ideas, because as a hub, we compete for 67% of the passengers who fly through. They have a choice. They can go to Denver, they can go to Phoenix, and we want them to come here, because the more of them that come here, they help pay for the operation and construction of the airport, but they also help add additional nonstop service. We have over 100 nonstop flights from Salt Lake. If we didn't have that connecting traffic, we'd have about half that many. And that nonstop capacity makes an immense economic contribution to this region. So everything we can do to make people go, hey, I want to fly through Salt Lake, is really terrific. And it just happened to work very nicely. I'm glad it happened when it did, because we're basically shutting down all scope changes and project adds at this point and getting our head down to open the doors on September 15th. And it's been wildly successful, I might add, just by the feedback that we've gotten.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Johnston.
Thanks for all this. My question is about forecasting growth and needs.
Yeah.
So going back to your slide with when we talked about the taxi lane extension and the scope changes, the increasing of the scope. The question for me is, one, on the North Concourse, Phase 3 is funded and being built, is that right? Or no?
No, Phase 3 is future. So
Future.
those in white, those are 15 additional gates that can be added at a later date.
So the question for me is, you said if we have growth of 5 to 6% in another year, at what point do we hit capacity and Delta and everyone agrees we need that extension?
Well, the airline use agreement provides a mechanism for any carrier currently serving Salt Lake to push the button for some or all of that expansion, and that has not occurred yet. And I would not expect it to occur until after Phase 1 is open, because we can't actually start to build the expansion until we are done with the North Concourse. That's the current phasing plan, which is mind-numbingly complex, because we have to keep our gate count up. Mm-hmm. And I have to be a little careful about how I say this, because this budget amendment is considered by the SEC to be material. So how we disclose it is very important, and this is actually our official disclosure today of this budget amendment. That would be also a material addition in scope. Having said that, I think you just kind of have to look at the numbers, and if we continue to grow at 5 or 6%, I will be surprised if we demobilize the project without proceeding with that change. It's just a question of when that might happen. We make choices like this based on something called planning activity levels, right? So I don't have a date circled. It's when we reach a certain volume. Consider, though, today we're operating, 26 million annual passengers in a facility that was built for 10. So it's also just a question of what kind of pain people are willing to endure before they're willing to proceed. These would be the cheapest gates in the entire project, though, because everything else is done. And so I'm pretty optimistic that we'll see this in our future.
So in your long-term planning, you mentioned the current airport is exceeding by far what it was planned to do. That's not abnormal, obviously.
Yeah.
From a long-term planning perspective for the airport, do you have a ratio or a sense of what you want to hold to for the current infrastructure, and at what point you would push to have an increase? The question really for me is, at what point are we already going to hit capacity before we even open up?
Yeah, I would guess that our customers, the good folks who are paying for this, are likely to push the button sometime in the next 3 or 4 years. And keep in mind, it then takes a significant amount of time to actually build it.
Do we have other phasing after phase 3 that you want to share now?
Well, actually, we'll touch on this a little bit in the next presentation. We're doing the first master plan of the airport since like 1996 when this was envisioned. And if you have kind of a vision of the aerial of the airport in your head, the next phase would occur where the fuel farm is, the north support, all of our maintenance facilities, the Delta hangar, all that has to be moved. And that's a large part of what our master plan is now preparing for, so that in 25 or 30 years, we'll be ready. All of that will be out of the way, and we can begin with the next phase.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Great. Well, thank you very much for the thorough review on this. Bill, if you want to stay at the table.
Yep.
Who else is going to be joining? Actually, it's looking like
Mike
it's just
Williams
you.
and Brady Fredrickson.
Okay.
Oh, no, I've got to have smart people up here to do this.
Great. And this next item will be, it's informational for us, Department of Airport briefing on sustainability and future growth.
Mr. Chair, there is a council added item in budget amendment number 3, if you'd like to discuss it now.
Yeah, let's do that before we hit into this.
This is from Councilmember Rogers, who's absent today, so I'll do the best from my discussions with him. This is a request to update the Northwest and North Point Small Area Plan. It was originally done in 2000. It includes land that is within Salt Lake City as well as unincorporated Salt Lake County. This is the area directly north and to an extent east of the International Airport.
Okay, and just to clarify, this is the area that was under review for potential annexation by North Salt Lake that the Salt Lake County Council voted down. And so this would help the city proactively look at the future of that property. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Is it limited to just that portion of that area?
So it's envisioned as being the Salt Lake County area currently within the city, as well as the adjacent unincorporated county land. So it would be both.
Is there a map?
I don't have a map ready at the moment.
It's okay. Should I see one at some point?
We do in our
in my presentation, I have a map of a similar of the area, basically. If you'll go to the next. So yeah, the next slide. Basically, that area is shown. The area in red is actually the North Point annexation area, and then the I guess to the south and west is the area in question that the master plan will cover, more or less.
I would just add to this, having come from an airport after 17 years that was surrounded by densely populated residential neighborhoods, I really look forward to this master plan because I can't tell you how fortunate we are to have an international airport of this size with runways of this length and not be surrounded by residential neighborhoods. Most big airports, if you really think about the places you've been, you're flying in and you're flying right over rooftops or taking off over rooftops. And first of all, it's not a great way to live, number one. Number two, these tend to be low and moderate income residential neighborhoods. So there is, I think, a social justice, environmental justice piece of this. But secondly, the noise complaints are just endless. We get thousands and thousands of calls every year from people complaining about noise, about which we could really do very little because we're not going to remove the runways. And so this is really an opportunity to add that dimension to the master plan for that area, and we are grateful for that.
And council members, this issue it includes. So what we did after the airport made their proposal in front of the Salt Lake County Council. Chair and vice chair requested the airport to go over that presentation that they made to the county council. That's what this is going to be, as well as some of the sustainability piece. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So, any other questions on the budget item?
There is not currently a estimated cost or specific funding sources. The airport, we understand, had employees that served on the steering committee for the original 2000 study and may be able to contribute funds in addition to the general fund balance for this study. So if the council supports this item, we can follow up with the administration on what recommended funding sources they suggest, as well as the total cost.
So it sounds like you're looking for a straw poll.
Yes.
So those who are interested in having the city fund this, thumbs up, thumbs down if you're opposed. That is unanimous.
Okay.
With James being absent. Okay.
So I'll move on to the balance of the
Chair.
presentation. We want to talk a little bit about something that hasn't been kind of the lead talking point for the new SLC, but it's really important, I think, and it's a great story, and that is the advantages, the environmental advantages that will exist in our new facility as opposed to the one we're operating right now. So I'm going to click through these and get to this.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to kind of step you through the environmental improvements that we've made, and they're quite fun, and they're a vast improvement to where we were at. First, I'm just going to go over kind of the building itself. We are a LEED certified. We're going to be a LEED Gold building. Definitely. After when it's said and done, which is very nice. As part of that, we all know that to get LEED points, we have to do things like public transportation connectivity. We installed more efficient plumbing fixtures. We're going to be 30% more energy efficient. As part of it, too, we also purchased 2.1 megawatts of green power through the solar subscriber program. That accounted for about 4% of our power. Again, we're doing about 20% of materials are produced locally and contain recycled content. We have certified wood, and we also have about 95% of the construction waste is being reused. Now, let's just go back to that one for 1 second.
Councilmember Fowler, while you're going back.
How is it being reused?
Okay, so right now, a lot of the construction waste, because of the good planning that happened through the 1996 master plan, a lot of that waste is concrete and a lot of it is soil. So what we're doing is we're actively grinding up the concrete that we're taking out, and then we're using it as subbase. And we're also, there's a kind of a program going on through our operations where wildlife wildlife hazards are a problem at an airport. We actually go over some of our infield and we put some of that down to protect against wildlife and things like that. So it kind of acts as a pseudo asphalt or concrete hard surface. Those are the types of things we're doing.
Thank you for that. And you got so excited when I asked that question, so thanks for being excited about that,
Very
too.
passionate about it.
This is fun stuff. Hey, well, it is. It really is. Yeah, Sorry. Okay. I'll quit smiling now. As we go through the lead requirements, really what it boils down to, though, is as the passengers go into this building, you know, you don't really see the 2.1 megawatts of power that we've purchased. But what you will see and what you will feel is this building is full of natural light. We have an opportunity, Bill and I, and the other directors, we walk through the airport probably once a week, the construction, and obviously all the lights aren't installed, they're getting there, but they're not on, and you would be amazed at how much light this building has just because of the natural light. You know, the color scheme fits into the Utah environment. That's another thing. And then, I'm a mountain guy. As you go into the facility and you go into the plaza and specifically, and then the ends of the concourses, they're all windows, so you can see the Oakers and the Wasatch Range, and then you can see Antelope Island as well. So those are part of I guess they're the benefits of a well-designed building. LEED and a well-designed building. So let's go on to the next one.
I have one question.
Go ahead. Where are we at?
What did you say? College theme? The college themed style? Is that what you said? No.
Color scheme.
Color
scheme.
Sorry, I'm like college scheme. Oh, the youth.
Yeah, we would. So,
It's all blue and red.
Yeah, it would be all blue and red for me.
Yeah.
Just red.
I'm staying
Just red.
away from that.
Just red. All right, cool. So another thing that at the airport we've done is we are in the airport carbon accreditation program. We're what is called a level 2. We're at a level 2 certification. We've been at a level 2 certification for about 3 years. Now, let me just step you through. On the bottom right-hand corner, it says carbon accreditation. That's the logo. Level 1 is mapping. Level 2 is reduction. Level 3 is optimization, and level 4 is neutrality. Right now, we're at a level 2. That means what we've done is we've gone through and we've mapped out all of our carbon emissions, and then for the last 3 years, we've actually taken steps to reduce those carbon emissions. And we've reduced those by about 12% total over the last 3 years. How we've reduced these, how we've reduced our carbon emissions is one, and I like to think of it as like a typical homeowner. What do you do in your house to reduce your carbon footprint? Well, first of all, we converted all of our runway lights to LED lights. Just so happens that if you total up all our runway length, you're at about 38,000 feet. So we have about 38,000 feet of runway with brand new LED lights. Two, if you're you change out your lights, your HVAC system, we did the same. We upgraded some of our boilers to new energy efficient boilers. And then three, you install those smart thermostats. Well, we bought a program called SkySpark. It's a building kind of automation. It basically integrates in with our building automation and kind of tracks our usage, and it tells us basically where we can be more energy efficient. So those are 3 ways that we've really reduced our carbon footprint, and we've reduced by 12%. Now, another thing that we're doing right now is we're participating in with the city. We're going hand in hand as the biggest electrical user in the city. We really are actively pursuing and working with you guys to get to 50% renewable energy by 2022. So we're actively pursuing that. As I said, we're at a level 2. There's some things we can do to get to a level 3. Basically, at a level 2, it's the airport, and a level 3, you start looking at other entities. Basically, you start looking at the airlines, the tenants in the airport. Well, let's move on to that next slide, Bill. Thank you. Okay, so one of the things that we're doing, and this is one of the exciting things that we're doing, is we are converting all of the ground service support equipment to electric. Okay, as you're waiting for a gate, the gate hold, you can see all the bag tugs, all the bag carts, the baggage conveyors. You can see they're all gas-powered, emitting vehicles, right? So what we're doing through this program is we're eliminating all of those. Basically, and what I'm getting at is the 3 main ground support equipment, and that is the bag tugs. That's the cart, the little tug that tows the carts around, the bag loader, as you can see in the middle, and then the pushback tractors. They're all going electric. So what is that doing? Well, in phase one, and this is only phase one, remember, we're continuing to do this till 2026. You know, we have phase two, all the other phases, they'll provide more and more electrical GSE, but in phase one, we'll get about 200 pieces of new electric GSE equipment. So basically, all those old gas-powered ones will be phased out. Go ahead.
They'll be off to Denver.
Yep.
You know.
Off to Denver.
Off to the other airports.
Hey, so how many are there? How many, if we're getting 200 replaced, what's the total fleet approximately?
Oh, the total fleet, I would go probably around 400. I'd have to really go. Let me get back with you on that. I can get back with you the exact count.
And off the top of your head, do you know what, with an 8,000 metric ton reduction in GHGs, what is a current emissions?
I'd have to really look at that.
Okay,
Look
just
into
to
that.
put it in perspective.
Can do.
That would be
Can do.
helpful.
Yeah, good.
Sorry, I can get back with that. But when we did with the EPA's conversion, basically what we've done, just by simply going to the eGSE, we've reduced our emissions by about 1,700 vehicle trips per year, or 1,700 vehicles per year, the emissions of 1,700 vehicles, okay? I just put that in perspective so you can kind of get a feel. The next slide.
Can I ask you another interrupting question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Approximately how many employees are at the airport?
Every day, about 15,000 people get up and go to work at the airport.
15,000 people work at the
15,000.
airport.
Yeah, not a lot of them are flight crews, you know, but yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah, it's going to grow.
Okay, thanks.
Another thing that we're doing is we're actively doing an alternative fuel program. Now, we've been running CNG gas, a CNG bus fleet since 1992. We usually purchase about 250,000 gallons of fuel a year. But right now, we are in construction. We're building a new bus fueling facility, and as part of that, what we're going to do is we're going to go away from compressed natural gas and go into, we're entering agreement and we're negotiating with Dominion Energy to go into renewable natural gas to all of our fleets. That renewable natural gas is a pretty cool kind of thing, because it will actually take the methane and things from our local landfills and use that to power our buses, which is a cool kind of benefit. And that will eliminate 300 metric tons of greenhouse gases, and that's the equivalent of about 600 vehicles off the road per year. Next. This Bill hit on. This is a slide that Bill hit on, and that is just the straight benefit of the new airport. One of the neatest things for a planner, because I'm basically, my job is to ensure that the facilities not only meet tomorrow's growth in the September 2020's growth, but the 50 and 60 years. So we actively, as we're doing the master plan, we're looking at delay studies and taxi time studies. But one of the things that really jumped out as we modeled the airfield is that the airfield, once this new terminal opens and the new concourses open, we start looking, and you look at the taxi times fall and the departure. So basically the delay time falls. You can see that right now in a north flow, that means all the aircraft are taxiing to the north. Taxi times will go down by over a minute. And in the south flow, it's about the same. So what this all does, and then it also departure delays. Basically, you won't be in line for aircraft as often. You know, you're not 15th or 16th in line. You're going to be quicker to take off.
You know, a minute may not seem like much, but when you're got 400,000 operations a year,
that's exactly
it really adds up.
It does add up. So when we modeled the taxi times and the fuel reduction, basically the emissions saved with those improved times, we basically saved 4,800 metric tons of greenhouse gases, or equivalent to another 1,000 vehicles off the road. So what does this all mean as far as our environmental kind of programs at the airport? If you look at this, the 1,700 tons, or the 1,700 vehicles removed from the eGSE, the 600 from the the buses and the recycled natural gas, or the renewable, natural gas, and then the 1,000 vehicles from the, just from the aircraft taxi reductions, you're looking at equivalent to removing about 3,300 vehicles off the emissions from 3,300 vehicles off the road per year, which is, if you look at our new parking structure, it's about 3,600 stalls, so we're almost removing the entire parking structure, the emissions from those cars.
Okay, Councilmember Wharton, and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yeah, thank you. So, do you know how much this will offset relative to how many additional planes that we have coming in, and how much that's going to add to?
Okay, so this takes into just 1 year, and what we'll do is we'll model in, so I don't have the exact numbers for future. We have not modeled the future growth of the airport, although we've seen a bit of a reduction. So over the past 5 or 10 years, we've actually seen a reduction in operations, which basically is kind of counterintuitive. You're seeing more passengers, but less operations, which an operation is a takeoff and a landing. So why that is you're getting you're going away from those smaller 50-seat planes, those less energy efficient planes, and you're basically increasing to that newer Delta fleet mix that they're going to.
We have
aircraft.
substantially fewer operations today than we did a decade ago.
Yeah.
And so the passenger volume is being managed by having larger and fuller planes. So before 9/11, Southwest Airlines had a business model that was fill half the plane and take off, just keep those frequencies going. And over the course of the last decade, the airlines have just gotten so much more effective at filling their planes. So we have one of the highest seat load factors of any major airport in the United States, so approaching 90%, which an airline considers to be full. So bigger planes, fuller planes, more passengers, but fewer operations. And the smaller planes are basically going away from our market, the 50-seat RJs. 10 years ago, we had 240 daily departures of regional jets, the small 50-seaters. This year, maybe 40. In a couple of years, very, very few.
And this is how not science-minded I am. Isn't there something about how a lot of the jet fuel that's expended is like less of it is like on taking off and landing, and that's, a lot of it is when the plane has reached like its full cruising altitude, and that's like above the airshed?
Yeah, that would be above
correct?
the airshed.
Yes.
Okay, can you explain that? Can you just explain what I just said to me?
Well, I don't know about the actual emissions over the airshed. The one thing that I can explain is just for Salt Lake International, the biggest pollutant, I guess, or the biggest would be the taxi times, and then that sitting at the top of that concourse waiting to push back. So I think we'd have to go more airport specific and do a deep dive into where the emissions are, specifically our airport. We have a saying that's, you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So hopefully, or not hopefully, when we get the new development done, we will see a reduction in those emissions on the ground.
Great, thank you.
The other thing that's happening is that the airlines, and particularly Delta, after their bankruptcy, as they started getting back into the market and trying to figure out who they were going to be, instead of buying all new aircraft, they went out and bought whatever they could find, essentially, just to keep their network up and to really keep an eye on the bottom line. Well, all of those are going away for new, really fuel-efficient airplanes. And so the fleet mix at Salt Lake, because we're a Delta hub, is improving dramatically over where it was 5 or 6 years ago. Which is something that we don't account for directly in our work, but it's going to have a tremendous effect here.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the newest fleet mixes of any airport.
Right.
I wondered about whether or not you've had conversations or done any modeling about potential for UTA to expand hours of service so that the 15,000 or so people coming and going, which is 30,000 trips a day.
Yeah, that's
It's no small amount there.
That is exactly. And as a matter of fact, we are meeting with UTA regularly. We had a meeting, and they've actually have talked about coming out to the airport, and what we're going to do is we've talked with them about expanding kind of the busing to the airport. There was an issue with them not being able to. They needed a dead-end spot and then some facilities for their bus drivers to turn around. We're going to be working with them to find a spot like that. And then as far as we'll bring up and revisit the tracks, because I think that's an important thing that we need to do.
Schedule is really a challenge because it's obviously a shift operation, and so it's available for basically one shift a day, which is just not
enough.
Going to get it.
It's not
Do
enough.
all of the employees at the airport, recognizing there's many employers at the airport, have a transit pass?
I couldn't tell you that just because there are so many, and I'm not sure, maybe Donnell knows what.
He's not.
Oh, he's not here. Okay.
No.
What Delta's policy
That's
is,
actually,
but-
we're in active
yeah.
discussion with UTA on that as well.
But, I mean, to what extent can you
So-
negotiate for all of the employers at the airport?
So we actually can't negotiate for like a Delta. They'd have to
Right.
administrate their own policy. And I think right now, I wish Donnell was here, they kind of give a choice of a bus pass where they'll fund you a bus pass, or a parking. They'll actually pay for the parking of the employee. I think that's kind of the program they're in. Again, we're actively looking into that.
Illuminating. It's exciting to think about
Yeah.
the potential to affect 30,000
Mhm.
trips
Yep.
in the city. Thanks.
Okay.
Great.
Good.
Okay.
Any other questions?
A little project update? Do you want to?
Yeah, let's do
Okay,
let's
good.
do
I
that.
want to make sure Mike gets a little time here.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
We can do this probably pretty quick because we're so far behind schedule.
Nope, you're good.
Okay.
This is only $4.5 billion. I mean, it's only kind of important.
If you go back to
In a day.
if you go back to the cover slide for a minute, if it's there, just go back one. Here you go. All right, you've seen this over and over and over again, but this is what we're building, whole new airport. The thing that a lot of people don't remember is that we started this in 2014. So we had a groundbreaking in 2014. Some of you were there. And we've built a 3,000 space parking area so that we could capture another area and build a rental car facility. So the parking opened in 2014. The QTA and RSS, which is the quick turnaround facility and the maintenance facilities for the rental cars, opened in 2016. And that allowed us to start knocking stuff down and building new stuff. And the good news is that what we're building today looks like the rendering. So that's kind of how you measure your success at the end of the project. You know, does it look like the picture? And it kind of does. The next slide is a recap on where we are on safety and schedule. As far as safety overall, for the original program plus the North, we are well under the national average, which OSHA tracks for lost time rate and recordable rate. Those are the number of recordable incidents that may occur. You know, if someone hurts their hand or something like that. And we've worked over 7 million man-hours to date. So a lot of work has been put in place. There's a lot of people that have put in time on it, and our rates have stayed very low. And we have a big focus on it to keep it that way. As far as schedule, we are on schedule, as Bill tells everybody, and so we're on schedule. Some of the added scope items that everybody went over earlier were quite challenging for us to swallow, especially the two-bay expansion of all 3 levels of the terminal, because we didn't really start designing that until the summer of last year, so a little over a year ago, but we are out there today enclosing that structure. So the team has done a great job of delivering that. Some of you may not have seen these renderings, so I thought I'd flip through them fairly quickly. The first one is the terminal building. So you're seeing the 2-level roadway system out front, which is going to be very efficient compared to what we have today. You see there's pedestrian bridges that go across those roads, so you'll never have anybody walking across the roads. so which is very good for safety and efficiency as far as keeping the flow of traffic going, which is another benefit to the sustainable aspect. Terminal building, you'll start to see the copper-colored metal panels that are on the outside, and then also all of the glass and glazing. Yeah, there we are. It's, the third level of the terminal building where that elevated road is true ticketing if you really needed to go to the ticketing. To the left off the page is where the parking garage is, and a little building out in front of that called the Gateway Center, which has full-service rental car counters and airline counters, something unique to our facility. Next slide. Next slide is really giving you a look at the inside of the parking deck. So our parking deck is a really big footprint, but there's two areas like this that have skylights to kind of bring you to those areas, and the moving walks. We actually have moving walks in our garage to take you into the facility. We were in the facility, a few weeks ago, and everybody took a picture of this because it really does look like this. It's cool. Next slide is showing you the inside of what we call the Gateway Center. So right next to the garage, if you parked in the garage or if you rented a car, because we heard loud and clear from everybody early on, keep the rental cars close, so they still are on the first level of the parking garage. So if you rented a car, you came back, and you came into this facility and had your skis and everything else with you, you could drop them all off, go to ticketing, go to the rental car counters, and be all done with all your business and go into the facility and through the checkpoint and enjoy yourself. Because all of our baggage system is made to accommodate oversized bags. So bikes, golf clubs, bike boxes, they can all be inducted into the system from wherever you are. The next slide is just giving you an idea of what the terminal building ticketing level, third level, looks like if you really needed to get dropped off up there or go there. The escalators that you're seeing there service all three levels of the terminal building. Next slide, starting to be the kind of the main attraction, which is the center spine of the terminal building leading to the concourse. We call it the Canyon. And on either side is an art installation, which is called the Canyon. All those individual fins on either side were drawn by the artist, fed into a computer. They're all fabricated aluminum tubing with fabric on them. We'll have theatrical lights in the ceiling so we can add color to it to remind people of the various areas of Utah. On the bottom of that slide, you see TSA checkpoint on the right. And then on the left is our meet and greeter area, big area that'll hold 300 or 400 people for the Salt Lake City phenomenon of everybody coming to meet their loved ones as they're arriving at the facility. The next slide is showing you the main attraction, which is the plaza. So you get all the way through there, and at the end where that big wall is, there's a big area where there's lots of seating. There's a full-service restaurant on either side, Pago on one side, Market Street Grill on the other side. To the left-hand corner of that slide is the food court. And then in the center there, you're seeing the escalators that go down to the future central tunnel that'll join out to the North Concourse. We can't build that until we tear down Concourse D.
Mike.
So we have another tunnel we're going to use in the meantime.
May I interrupt for a
You
moment?
bet.
This is totally tribute to Soren Simonson. I'm going to try to pick a paint color here for just a second. I've seen in other cities, one in Minneapolis at the top of a building, kind of like 111, where they have lights projected on the hat truss area, where seasonally on the equinox and the solstice, the lighting changes. So it's basically quarterly, but it shifts and projects, a different. And I think it would be so cool to have a seasonal effect on the canyon.
Yeah.
I'm glad you feel that way.
Oh.
Because those lights are all programmable, and I don't know, we'll have 3 or 4
Comes with a
programs
computer program
from the
and whole-
beginning,
yeah,
but
pre-programmed.
I think with as much tourism as comes through here to
Yeah.
go to the outdoors, that it would be such a cool way to welcome people.
Red Rock in the summer, and it'll be
Yeah.
white in the winter, and
Yep.
it'll be,
It'd be really
green and
That's
red
kind
for
of-
Okay,
Christmas.
that's all. Thank you, Mr.
that's kind of
Chair.
the idea.
Yeah.
The next slide, you would never really see this except for out the window of an aircraft, but it does give you a view of what that plaza area really looks like. And if you're standing in that area today, you know, and if you fast forward in time and think of none of the old airport being there, you're just surrounded by mountains and beautiful views and the aircraft. Let's see this is the concourse. So both concourses are very similar, except for the South Concourse does have the 6 international gates and the sterile corridor. But you can see what Brady was talking about as far as the natural light. So the concourse ceiling slopes because we have a clear story on the left side, on the south side to bring in light. And then, of course, there's windows in all the hold rooms. There's sensors in all of the areas of the inside of the facility so that the artificial lights really are only used when there's not natural light coming into the building. So as Brady said, today you could be in the building and, you know, with no lights on, it looks like daytime. When we added the North Concourse, the mayor approved extending the canyon concept into what we call the mini plaza in the North Concourse. So if you left the South Concourse, went through the tunnel and came back up, you would know that you're still at the same airport. Very few airports have, you know, you have the opportunity to build a whole new airport all at once. So it's all going to look like one campus instead of a bunch of add-ons. That's just an exterior shot of the North Concourse, again, looking similar. A few statistics. We are averaging around 1,800 trade workers right now. When I put this slide together, we had 1,805. Last week we had 1,825. You can see the number of hours worked. A good news story of the work that we've awarded to date. To date, we've awarded $1.6 billion worth of trade contractor work. A little over $1 billion has gone to contractors within the Wasatch Front. So a lot of it has stayed local. We are getting ready. In fact, yesterday and today were the pre-bid walks for the demo of the existing facilities. And the next phase, when we buy out the second phase, which will start this fall into the summer of next year, there's about another $800 million worth of work to buy. So it's been a good project for the local contractors. The next slide, I'm not going to go into this. All it does is show you that we're just tracking like a gazillion milestones every week and every month to make sure that we're hitting the dates. A couple of quick slides on phasing. So this is showing you what we are building today. So you can see the North Concourse under construction, the South Concourse, the terminal building, and how adjacent we are to the existing facilities. Next slide is giving you an idea of what we have to do to get those international gates operational. So there's the hard stand operation where you see that 2-lane hard stand and those little aircraft down there near the word trailers. That allows us to knock down the rest of Concourse E and the rest of the IEB facility there, or that portion of it, so that we can get those gates online when we open. The next slide shows you in red all the stuff that we will tear down. It'll all come down in phases, but we will immediately start demoing all of that stuff in red so we can build the rest of the program. The next slide shows you 2021, where we can start building the east side of the South Concourse, which will be called Concourse A when it's open, and the east side of the North Concourse, which will be called Concourse B when it's open, and then the central tunnel. You can see in the slide we're still using 2 of the existing concourses, F and C, because we don't have enough gates until we build the other half. And then magically we're all done. So this is showing you.
Then we start on the expansion.
This is showing you everything but phase 3. A few quick photos
Tell
to
me,
say.
tell me when that final phase again, is it
The
2024?
buildings are done in 2024.
Okay.
It takes until about 2026 to have all of the demo done and all the pavement replacement done on the east side.
Okay, thank you.
And then if phase 3 goes ahead, then that blank area next to the north will get filled up with 15 more gates. A few photos that show you that we really are building that. So you're seeing the terminal building, that big spine down the center with the plaza on the right side, and a portion of the south concourse. Way at the top, a little bit, you can see the north concourse. Looking forward, you're seeing the inside of the building. There's just work going on everywhere right now. Bottom right-hand corner, you see the terminal building really kind of looks like the rendering at this point. On the left-hand side, though, you can see the two-bay expansion has a little ways to go to catch up. And then we have lots and lots of terrazzo installed on the floor. Next slide. That's showing you some of the terrazzo installation, so you can see some of it's polished. The fellows on the right are putting down some terrazzo around the expansion joint, which looks pretty not really is polished, because it's not. The bridge on the bottom right-hand corner, that's the pedestrian bridge temporary that'll connect back to the existing airport while we use those gates. On the left-hand side, you're seeing the first installation of some gate millwork for Delta. Next slide is just what we're doing right now, which is paving like crazy all over the place, trying to get as much done as we can before winter. The next slide is the parking garage. So this is a little bit ago. This picture was taken a few weeks ago. The center section of that is about half roofed right now. The white area is roofed. The other areas are ready to be roofed. But you can see that's a fairly big footprint. On the right-hand corner, that is the ramp, the Helix ramp. So at either end of the parking garage, there'll be the same circular ramps that we have today. That's why we recently moved the road so we could build those.
And you have that, or that's scheduled to open next year?
The parking garage will open the same time as the rest of the facility.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you're out there today, you'll see that they're putting the metal panel trim pieces on the corner. They're painting and all of that, putting in moving sidewalks and elevators. The next slide shows you the North Concourse. And so although the NTP for this project was in April of 17, simpler project to build. It's kind of out on an island by itself, not tied into anything else. Doesn't have some of the complexities at the south as far as the sterile corridor and all that. So you can see that it's pretty much catching up, being built from the west end to the north. So you see there's metal panels on the west end, and the east end it's totally built out. And they're doing finishes and interior work. So the last slide is showing you a lot of the interior stuff going on the north, which is moving sidewalks, baggage makeup areas, and offices, and all kinds of other finishes. And that's a pretty quick update.
Great. Well, it's very exciting. Councilmember Fowler has a very, very, very quick comment.
It is. It's so quick. I was just wondering, when is the current parking lot scheduled to be demolished?
Shortly after we move.
Okay, so I've got some time.
Yes, you have some time. We're working on the...
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
It's very exciting. Let's do this. Let's take a 5-minute break. I know. And then we still have quite a few things. So let's take a quick break. Come back at 5:15 for the Third West Reconstruction Project update. back. Our next item is an informational presentation about Third West Reconstruction Project update. Joining us at the table will be John Larson, Will Becker, and Braley Bullard. Nick, are you coming forward too? Only, okay. And I know Jen McGrath is in the back trying to hide, but she's there as well. Okay, great. So whoever is gonna, who's the point on this?
I'll start out.
Okay,
and
great.
then we'll kind of bounce between these two. So we are really excited to talk about Third West. When I first started the city, almost exactly 2 years ago, I had no idea what was coming as far as kind of some real game changers in the transportation world here in Salt Lake City. And so with the implementation of Funding Our Future and the streets bond, city leadership laid the groundwork for some major upgrades, some very much needed upgrades. And really the first marquee project out of the gate for the streets bond is going to be Third West. This is a project that, it's a street that is kind of the back door, has been the back door to the city, but has had a lot of development activity in the last few years, and it looks like is really poised to really take off as and continue to grow and develop. And it's a street that really needs a lot of love, and we hope really sets the tone for the rest of the projects in the pipeline for the streets bond as far as what a Salt Lake City complete street really looks like. And so we're gonna, at this point, we're still fairly early in the process. We aren't going to be doing construction for a couple more years. And so we're going to finish the conceptual design and then the civil design, and then we can get rolling on the construction. What we've done so far mostly has been a lot of listening and a lot of outreach, and that's mostly what we're going to update you on today is what we've been hearing from the community.
So we have a couple of videos here that just highlights some of the things that we'll be looking at along the corridor, that we're some of the challenges that we'll be addressing. As you can see in this video here, we have a cyclist that is trying to negotiate 300 West, obviously having a pretty difficult time.
Wait a second. What the heck is this? This is the coolest presentation I've ever seen.
and
a drone?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the videos that the consultant that we have on board that's helping us put together. Disregard the animation itself in terms of what that design looks like. It's just for an example of what we might be able to do. But I think it provides a pretty good representation of.
Is that Andrew riding? It's you, Andrew.
It's Andrew.
No, it's our consultant.
I rode Third West once several years ago on my bike and promised never to do it again, but hopefully this project will change my mind.
I could watch that all day. Oh my gosh.
So obviously there's a lot of space there along 300 West that we are looking at potentially repurposing to provide better facilities for people that are cycling and walking along the corridor. So that's something that we're really focused on with this project. We have another video here that highlights some of the other challenges that we're looking at addressing along the corridor, including a lot of obstacles in the sidewalks themselves. Where there are sidewalks, there's a lot of missing sidewalks along the corridor. And so if you're someone who's walking or using a mobility device, a wheelchair, you're experiencing a lot of challenges just getting up and down the street. And it's something that we're hearing from a lot of folks that experience these issues on a daily basis that they'd like us to take a look at and address. So hopefully that gives you a good idea with that video of what we're looking at.
Development opportunity on the, what is that, on Third and?
So that's a vacant lot that I think, again, just highlighting some of the potential opportunities there. And we know along the corridor, we're seeing land use change. And
what does it say underneath development opportunity?
Friendly and inviting environment.
Oh.
make it friendly instead of empty.
Yeah, I hope that's the new, it's not friendly right now.
Yeah. So as we move away from existing conditions, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done, where we are, and what's to come. In terms of what's been done, we have been doing existing conditions analysis with traffic gaps for gap analysis on pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. But along with that, we've been doing a lot of extensive engagement, that we hope can be used as a model for a lot of these transformative funding our future bond projects moving forward, where we have really, really long corridors. So we actually performed a visioning workshop recently with city staff to talk to all the different departments and divisions that could be a part of this project, and did all of our initial public outreach, including focus groups, online and pedestrian intercept surveys, and having stakeholder meetings with community councils in the area, the HRC, Matt from the HRC on Paramount, and the Granary District Alliance. So some of the survey's still going. It's going to be open until about November 10th, but the preliminary results that we have seen from both our online survey and talking to people in person is that we've seen a lot of concerns from all across the board. We've had 1,700 people respond to the online survey. We've had 150 pedestrian intercept responses where we went to 3 different locations and talked to people using the corridor, on foot, on bike, using assistive devices. And also have caseworkers at the HRCs talking to the guests that are coming in with a paper survey, and the staff there is also participating. Some of the things that we've seen on the surveys is that the largest pedestrian issues were crossing the busy streets and just having an unattractive environment. The largest biking issues were that there were no bike lanes and the traffic goes really fast. The largest driving issues were that the roads are in poor condition, which we know, the reason we passed the bond. And then we also see aggressive driving and a lot of speeding. Some of the responses that we've seen as well, respondents, so on the survey we asked people which facility types they'd be comfortable using. That ranged anywhere from just sidewalks straight up to the road, to sidewalks behind the curb, to outdoor seating, along with different biking and crosswalks. Respondents would like to see the sidewalks between park strips and sidewalks behind park strips, and then also outdoor seating. Respondents would also like to see physically separated bike lanes, and would like to see landscape medians. And transit riders we have been finding would like to see more frequent buses, benches and amenities, and reduced fares. So that's kind of some of the preliminary results of the outreach we've been doing. As we are preparing for what we're doing now, we're preparing for an in-person event on the corridor. So as we've been trying a lot of these new engagement methods, going to where people are going to be, we're going to have a pop-up on the corridor. That's going to be family friendly, have games, supplement what's been collected in the surveys so far. We're also going to continue to have internal meetings to analyze public input and look at the technical findings. So what's to come? Like I said, we've got another pop-up event. We are actually doing an event at the HRC to engage with the populations there and the staff. We're going to be doing a technology workshop to look at some higher level technology ideas that could either be incorporated during the project or potentially look at things that can be added in the future. We're going to be doing some stuff around complete streets information because we heard from focus groups that there's still a little bit of confusion about what that means, and we really want to make people understand a bit more and engage with them on that. And then we'll have ongoing email and touch points throughout.
Sure, Councilmember Valdemoros.
I'm interested in just, if you could just describe some of this technology, the technology think tank. I wonder how this looks like, or what you're envisioning.
So I think that we're envisioning it being kind of like a focus group where they'll brainstorm different ideas about technology. Those could be electric vehicle charging, different signals, 5G things, parking, transit, and looking at like ideas that we could incorporate in the project or in the future.
Okay, so any more, like, is there something going on, like, right now, like, things are used in other cities that I'm not very familiar with those. I just want to know, like, an example so I can vision it in my head what it is. One of these things.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what Braley said. I think, honestly, the impetus on that is that we have applied twice, and we'll find out in December on the second time for a build grant. And one of the requirements is, are you embracing technological opportunities on the corridor? And so, there's, Tesla has a dealership along the corridor, and so it could be anything from, how do we better incorporate electric vehicle charging, or what, do we lay conduit for fiber? Could we do some things to help better integrate, better bus operations with getting so that like connected vehicle technology, things like that, so that the buses can talk to the signals. Those sorts of things.
Thanks.
John, hopefully you mentioned the corridor or the
build grant.
No, the placement for fiber, the conduit. So I know that and it might have been before you were transportation director, but I know that this council's had quite a few discussions about adding additional empty conduit every time we replace a street, not knowing exactly what the future is going to hold for technological advancements, but having that available so that we don't have to dig the street up would be much more cost effective just to lay empty conduit than having to go back. And so hopefully that's something that you're also planning as well.
I think that's definitely part of what we're looking at.
Okay. Councilmember Mendenhall.
On the tech side of things, has there been any conversation with the University of Utah about the powder money, the 5G network?
For this
NSF
corridor
grant?
For this corridor specifically, I don't think so. But more broadly, that has been something that they've asked us about.
I would love to have you all reach out and see if this kind of a massive reconstruction of a roadway that's intentionally looking to explore tech opportunities for smart building here, or whatever connectivity, whatever the tech connection needs to be, that they might be interested in that. And it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Councilmember Johnston.
Excuse me. I am very excited and interested in this project. I know it's a long, long ways away and a lot of reasons. The scope of it is really 3rd West, though. Is it talking about the cross sections of 13th and 17th particularly, or even 21st? Because 13th Track Station is a major sort of piece of this going forward. It's about a block off, obviously. So I don't know that the scope is going to take into account all of that, but I'd be intrigued on how we're going to handle those connections to 3rd West. The 13th is really my biggest concern. 17th is hard, but there's so much residential going in there. It's going to be a big issue. 13th, 9th is okay because there's more width to this streets and some more space, but 13th really is a congestion point for a lot of her pedestrians right now as it is. And there's no bicycle lane. There's no way to get east-west from 3rd to the track station or anywhere else. So give me a sense of, is that able to be incorporated in any way as far as design goes, even if you can't implement it with this, or how's that going to affect?
I think typically what we'll do is, for these corridor projects, is kind of understand the context in which we're making these enhancements and try and make sure that we leave at a minimum kind of places where you can have those future tie-ins. 13th South in particular, we've been working on, we're calling it a bike ped bypass because 13th South, the street itself is really restricted, so we're looking at along Paxton Avenue, kind of that area, having an east-west connection. So we've, I think, recently put in a like a hawk beacon on to cross 3rd West there. So those sorts of things is generally how we do those tie-ins. And so maybe not directly part of the project, but we recognize as we do the project that context so that we can tie into other future projects and piggyback off of this one. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I think I'm very concerned about 13th in a lot of ways. I think it's already pedestrian heavy between the track station and everything else down there. The bypass makes some sense, especially if it gets completed over the track station area. But I think there's already issues there, and I'm not sure if there's ways that the Third West reconstruction design phase could produce some ideas about how that gets alleviated sooner than later. I think it's already an issue right now, and it's probably not going to get better with the new townhomes going in down there.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. That's the sort of thing where potentially we'd maybe spin off another like mini project to make that tie-in happen.
Thank you very much for that. I know it's expanding the scope, and that doesn't help anybody's budget or resources. But it's a huge piece of Third West though right now, and it's going to get bigger, I think.
It's something that we're very aware of. When they did the pedestrian intercept survey, I think we knew that there was a lot of pedestrian activity at that intersection with 13th South. But I think the project team was really surprised that it is a very, very busy intersection, not just for cars, but for people on foot as well.
So I just wanted to, Braley had touched on it briefly, but just touch quickly on the Vision Summit that we held. So not only are we reaching out and getting as much feedback and listening to the community, but we're also trying to work very collaboratively within with our city divisions and departments to really bring people to in on the project as early as possible, make sure that this is a conversation that we start early, and we really believe that going through this Vision Summit process where really the goal is to come up with a unified vision, goals, and some measures, it'll ultimately lead to a better project. So out of that summit, some of the leading guiding principles that we came to were create a safe and friendly corridor, make it a beautiful corridor, collaborate strongly with the community, make it accessible for all users, be multimodal, future ready, so those are some of the technology and also sustainability goals that we have, and then also be an economic driver in the future. And so we're using what we're hearing from those in the community and from within the city to ultimately come up with measures and goals that we can use moving forward and communicate with the community in the future.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
I was asked to check in with you if we can assure that through, which may not, I don't know if you can assure us of this yet, but it would be lovely if you could, that through the construction process, we will be able to maintain ADA accessibility through the area so that people can reach the HRC through construction.
Yes, I think that's really important. I mean, I was looking at Don, who usually handles the what happens during construction, but yeah, absolutely agree. I think we're looking at 2021 for construction, right? So we have a lot of time to figure the logistics of that out, but that is definitely something that will require of the contractor.
And are we legally required to maintain ADA accessibility through the construction site? I mean, you know, through the public right away?
I'm not sure about the legal requirements on it, but I think it's the right thing to do, especially in this location.
Yeah.
Well, it would make me feel like I don't need to ride this as hard through the next year and a half if I knew that legally we had to do it, but I know that you want to do it.
Right.
So any updates you can give as you get farther into the design process, but to prioritize that access remains continuous through the whole project. It is so critical for access to the HRC. So the community asked me to bring that to this conversation tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the project schedule that you're seeing here is the project schedule that includes all of the public touch points and the ongoing public engagement that we'll be doing. We're at the point right now where we are in October. We've got our, like I said before, our pop-up engagement event happening. We are going to have an engagement event at the HRC, and we're going to also be doing some business workshops in that tech summit. This is focused a lot on the public involvement. As this is happening as well, there are a lot of the technical designs and that sort of thing also happening as well. Anything? I think that's it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any additional questions or comments, so we appreciate your work and keep us in the loop as you move forward.
Thank you.
We are going to make a couple of changes. Because of the time, we are going to have to pull items number 11 and 12 from the agenda. So 11 was the Livable Streets Program proposal, which was dealing with traffic calming, and 12 was Consolidated Reporting Ordinance. So the final item that we will be discussing today before our board appointment interviews will be an informational item regarding the building improvement and public works projects, commonly known as the bid ordinance update. So Russell is going to lead this conversation. I don't see Patrick. David, are you going to handle things from the administrative side or no? Okay. And then Matthew Castle and Boyd Ferguson were supposed to be here as well. And I don't see.
Matt is on vacation.
Oh, well, then I guess he's not going to be here. So, Russell, do you want to walk us through, excuse me, walk us through this, or do we need to reschedule this at a time when we have folks from the administration here ready to talk about it?
I could give you a synopsis of the how and the why, but I'm not sure I could get into specifics of if you have specific questions.
Yeah, if you could give us a quick synopsis, and then what we'll have to do is reschedule this. It's unfortunate that we don't have an update ready, but hopefully things are continuing and the administration's following the bid ordinance. Is that okay? So, because I know that we have quite a few construction projects with the airport in particular, and we just need to ensure that that the city's following this. So, Russell, I don't even think you need to go through anything. We'll just go through. Let's go ahead and reschedule this at a time when the administration is here and ready to talk about it. I know that we do have our board appointees here and ready. So let's first, is Carol Osborne. Carol, if you could join us up at the table. No, you have to sit down. No, you can join her. That's fine. All right, Carol. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in serving on the library board.
Talk into this. Well, my name is Carol Osborne, and I'm actually a physician here in Salt Lake, and I've lived in Salt Lake since 1985. I came here for my medical residency, and, now I have kids and homes and businesses, and so I'm very well entrenched in the community. And I think the interest for me in terms of the library board is I've always had, growing up in a small town on the prairies of the Dakotas, libraries are always one of the most central things in my community. And I'm going back to the old library card days and the stamps. But for me, being a library has evolved into an amazing community center where people can come for all sorts of reasons, not just to get books. And I think what Peter is doing at the library is so exciting, and I want to involve my community and other communities that I'm not as familiar with in Salt Lake to join in that process of evolving an amazing place where people can gather and where information can be exchanged and networking can be done.
Great. Any questions for Carol? Councilmember Mendenhall would like to make a comment.
I won't say how I know Carol, but she is a wonderful community builder in ways that she hasn't talked about, and in elevating women in the conversations in this state, and elevating women in political conversations. And she's just far more than she's submitted to us this evening. I think I would be excited to appoint you to any board or commission for
Oh,
the
that's
city.
very nice of you. Thank
But
you.
I hear the library's a really good one, so I
Yeah,
hope you'll
it's
enjoy it.
my
there.
cup of tea. It's kind of what I love. I love books. I love interactions. I love people. I love to involve communities in that way.
Great.
Thanks for being willing.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Well, we thank you for your willingness to serve. I'm going to say this for you, and I'm also going to say it for Steve and Susan, who are here. Your name will be on the consent agenda next door in our meeting that we'll have at 7 o'clock. You don't have to wait around for the approval of that consent agenda, but you're welcome to if you'd like.
Thank you.
We really thank you for your willingness to serve on the library board.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Peter. Our next two appointments are for the Arts Council Board. Steve Barth, if you want to join us first. I know that we have a lot of questions for you.
Did they do a background check?
No, because we want to appoint him to the board, so we didn't do the background check.
I knew there was going to be one problem maker here.
Yeah. So, okay, tell us about yourself, Steve, and why you want to serve on the Arts Council.
I made the mistake, and I hope it's a forgivable mistake, 10 or 12 years ago of moving out of Salt Lake City. Well, I've repented, seen the error of my ways, and come back. And
But
I would
you
like
didn't
to
come back to District 6, which is a problem. So, and I'm still not going to forgive you for that.
It's because I like Councilman Wharton better than you. So, and I would like to serve somewhere, and come from a very arts-oriented family. And I believe that the arts can define a community like nothing else. And what Salt Lake City Arts Council does and the resources they've got, I think, are wonderful. And I would just like to help and bring my silly little skill set to that and see what I can do.
Okay, who wants to give Steve a hard time? Okay, Councilmember Mendenhall.
This is why I didn't bring my family to this.
I'm not actually going to give you a hard time, Steve, right now, but maybe later. But was it last week, Councilmember Johnston? Council, when we approved the 1.5% for art. So there's even more resources about to come that way, and it's an exciting time to be a part of arts in Salt Lake City. Thank you for being willing to serve
Thank you.
your city.
I usually talk about when it's a candidate from District 3, how great they are, but I just appreciate you talking about how great I am this time, so thank you. You're always welcome in District 3. So thanks for being here, and thank you for volunteering your time and talent.
Thanks. If I can put one little bug in your ear, though, about the arts. There is public arts and public arts programs within the city that are centered about public areas and public spaces. But there isn't really anything if private citizens wanted to do some things to beautify and do some of those things. And I think that's something that could be worked on.
And I'm grateful that you brought that up because we actually do have an ordinance that now allows for that type of a contribution to be made. So in the past, it's been fairly impossible to do that, but now we do have that in place. So that's something. Hopefully, let's all work on together.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Okay. Your name will be on the agenda next door. So we'll see you later. Susan Coles Rickman will be much more nice. Much nicer to you.
Know me.
We don't know you as well.
As
Let's say
well,
that. Yeah.
Well, I'm Susan Coles Rickman, and I fell in love with the arts when I saw Natalia Makarova dance the Swan on Ed Sullivan. So now you all know how old I am. And then my life took a different, well, I had a moment of truth when I was a ballet student in Chicago in the 70s when I got to be a tour guide at the Chicago Tribune. And those two things, I brought myself to Utah as a ballet major, but I ended up being a ballet and a journalism major. And those two things combined led to a 40-some year career of mostly promoting the arts. So I'm a marketing person. My skill set is definitely promotion, presenting, and marketing. And I spent 20 plus years after working at the Arts Festival office as their marketing person for a few years, 20 plus years on their board, 2 stints as chair of their board. And most of my career has been working for nonprofits, either promoting the arts or human services. So that's pretty much my passion and my skill set that I can bring to the Salt Lake City Arts Council. I'm very interested in, while I know that there are dire problems that people have, homelessness, poverty, hunger, I think the arts are what lift us all up. And I'm really honored that I've had a career where I've been able to do that and make the arts accessible to a wide variety of cultures and people and income levels. And I hope to continue to do that in this new realm. And I'm not very familiar with the new strategic plan. I keep hearing little bits of it from Catherine. But I want to be able to contribute to making Salt Lake City as vibrant as it possibly can be for as many people as it can possibly be that for. So,
Great. Questions or comments?
Just
okay.
Another fabulous District 3 resident. So proud to have
18th
you.
Avenue.
That's right.
Which looks like a parking lot today because the sun is shining.
Yes, very
So
busy.
pretty up there.
Nice.
That's all, unless you wanted to share what you like about me as well.
The minute you came to my door with that flyer, you had me. You had me at hello.
Stop, you didn't need to say that. Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks
Well,
for
thank
your
you.
time and talent.
Yeah, thanks for your willingness.
Thank you.
All right. I will look for a motion to enter into the closed session. Well, we need a.
Yeah. Mr. Chair.
I'll look to one of the attorneys to.
I move that we enter into a closed session for the purpose of discussing strategy related to imminent litigation.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Councilmember Wharton, second by Councilmember Johnston. I'll roll call this. Councilmember Johnston?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Mendenhall? Yes. Fowler? Yes. Valdemoros? And I am a yes. Councilmember Rogers is absent, so we're in closed session.
And dinner too.
Thank you all.
Want to do dinner during it?